Chapter 885. Li learned from the Princess Royal that the case of the missing women had been solved. He didn't expect that a powerful person could do such a crazy thing. He turned to look at her and asked, "How are those women now?" Mingzu shook her head and said, "They are still recuperating in the medical center. It's not difficult to heal their physical injuries, but it's their hearts." Li thought for a moment and said, "After such a thing happened, they must have a hard time in the future. Instead of being gossiped about, it's better to find a job for them in your place so that they won't be looked down upon in the future." He had heard about the situation that day. No one expected that the crazy Peng family kidnapped those women just to satisfy some people's perverted desire. The death of the head of the Peng family was not to be regretted. But how could those women who were physically and mentally injured live a normal life in the future? It was a big problem. And Mingzi nodded and said, "I know this. What are you going to do with the playboys caught by the Peng family in them?" Li looked at her and asked. According to the law, the head of the Peng family should be beheaded. Several important accomplices will not be able to keep their lives. Although the other people's crimes are relatively light, they cannot avoid being exiled for 1,000 miles. As for those playboys, the lightest punishment will be exile. Li Mingzhu stood up and said, "However, there are still 2 women that we have not found." Li frowned slightly and asked, "Haven't found them?" Mingzhu shook her head and said, "The Peng family confessed to the crimes they committed and told the details of the case, but they denied that they had kidnapped the 2 women. The servants of the Peng family have also interrogated them one by one, and then conducted a thorough search of the Peng family, but they also didn't find any clues related to the 2 women." Li was surprised and said, "Could it be that there is someone else involved in the case of the 2 women? I've already sent people to continue the investigation." Mingzi looked at him and thought of another matter and said, "The Ministry of Justice has already handed over the case of the Zeng family. Lord Zeng was indeed wronged, but the main culprit died on the way to exile, so his family couldn't find him or pursue the matter. The court can give some compensation to the Zeng family and Miss Li waved his hand and said, "Since they're dead, there's no point in pursuing the matter. Compensation, forget it. But since they were wronged, it's not too much to overturn the case and give justice to the Zeng family, right?" Mingzu looked at him and nodded and said, "Of course." Li cupped his fists at her. "Thank for the matter with the Zeng family." Li Mingzhu looked at him and asked, "This thank you, are you saying it yourself, or on behalf of Miss Zeng? Is there a difference?" Mingzhu thought about it for a moment and nodded. Li Mingzhu pondered for a moment and nodded. "That's right. There's really no difference between the 2 of you." Li thought for a moment and said, "Although it's an unjust case, without you, I wouldn't have been able to get the court to admit the mistake. If it's Miss Zeng, the court has wronged her, so she doesn't need to thank me." Mingzhu looked at Li calmly and said, If it's me, I won't say it." Li waved his hand and said, "Between us, you should be the one thanking me. And if you really want to thank me, I'm afraid you won't be able to finish it in your lifetime." Mingzhu crossed her arms in front of her chest and murmured, "There's still a long lifetime." Li looked over. At this moment, he suddenly had the urge to call Mississippi Lu over and stand shoulder to shoulder with her. That way, it would be clear who won and who lost. When Li saw Mississippi Lu, she was reading in her room. Mississippi Lu was reading a book. This was a phenomenon even rarer than the Antares guarding the heart. Other than those secret scrolls that only had pictures but no words, Li had never seen her seriously read any book. Although Mississippi Lu was literate, she didn't know much. There were even 2 words in the green jade case that she didn't know. It was hard to imagine how she would remember to read something like the Analects of Confucius. She held the book in her hands and seemed to have encountered something she couldn't understand. Her brows furrowed, and she quickly flipped through a few pages. Then, she quickly turned back and looked at it again and again. Finally, she grabbed the book impatiently and waved her hand. Only then did a relaxed expression appear on her face. Li took the book that Mississippi Lu had thrown out the door and walked into the room to put it back. He asked, "Why are you reading this kind of book?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "I'm just flipping through it casually." Li knew that she was definitely not flipping through it casually because on the table in her room, in addition to the Analects of Confucius, there were two other books, such as The Great University and The Doctrine of the Mean. At the very front was the latest edition of the Minuet collection, which was compiled by those busybodies after sorting out the poems that he had thrown out. Since the Lantern Festival, the number of pages of this poetry collection had increased by one. In addition to this book, there was also a thick notes on the Minuet collection. He flipped through it casually and found that there were 17 or 18 notes on each poem. Those people really had nothing better to do. Mississippi Lou looked at the thick notes in his hand and raised her head to ask, "In your heart, is that Miss M.O. really so perfect that you would praise her with more than a dozen poems?" There was no way to answer this question. At that time, the relationship between the two of them was still a pure relationship between a man and a woman. He had only given her these poems because he wanted to help her. He had never thought so much, but now it seemed that every single one of them was a naked love poem. When these heavyweight poems were released, they praised her to the point that she was rare in the heavens and hard to find in the mortal world, like a fairy. Then, the other fairy seemed to be a little unhappy. "Hey, you've changed your perfume today. What's the smell? It smells quite nice." Li changed the topic without any trace. Mississippi Lou did not answer, and the atmosphere was a little awkward. "Well, I heard the news about Yang Liuking in the palace today." Li spoke again. He looked at her and asked, "Do you want to hear it?" "Not interested," Mississippi Lou said lightly, and then said, "But if you really want to tell me, I can reluctantly listen. I don't really want to say it." Li waved his hand and said, "Read your book first. I'll call you when it's time to eat." Instead of learning the good things, he actually learned to be arrogant from the Tsundra Lolita. The Tsundra Lolita was only arrogant now, but she became arrogant and reluctantly listened. When he walked to the door, Mississippi Lou's voice came again. "How about, before we eat, I reluctantly teach you a few more moves?" Li turned around and walked back. He said, "I feel that I've advanced too quickly recently. It's better to stabilize it, so I won't learn anything new." Mississippi Lou looked at him and asked, "About her, what did Mingzu say to you?" Speaking of the princess, Li thought of something. He looked at her and said, "There's no rush for this. A few days ago, Sue taught me 2 moves. One of them I haven't figured out yet." Mississippi Lou's face showed a look of interest. "Which move?" Li crossed his arms and said, "You first do what I do." A look of doubt appeared on Mississippi Lou's pretty face, but she still copied him and crossed her arms. She asked, and then, "That's it." Li looked her up and down. He shook his head for the Princess Royal and said, "Just now, I suddenly figured it out." Chapter 886. The situation in the Wu Kingdom is different from ours. The current emperor of the Wu Kingdom killed his brother and father. He didn't get the throne with a proper reason and didn't win the hearts of the people. He was despised by the scholars in the Wu Kingdom. Although he used force to clean up some of them, the whole Wu Kingdom was in great turmoil. Li looked at Mississippi Lou and said slowly, "Today, more than half of the places in the Wu Kingdom are out of the control of the imperial court. Among them, there are forces loyal to the former emperor of the Wu Kingdom, and there are bandits who took advantage of the chaos. In short, the Wu Kingdom is in a mess, very messy. Princess Duanrong, who disappeared mysteriously after the emperor of the Wu Kingdom seized power, returned to the Wu Kingdom a year ago. She gathered a few generals who rebelled against the current imperial court and also gathered a considerable force. They cleaned up the bandits who occupied the mountains and made themselves kings, and at the same time strengthened their force to fight against the imperial court." Li looked into her eyes and said, "You don't have to worry too much. There are many people around your apprentice now. Although it's not possible to overthrow the entire imperial court, they can still protect themselves." "I see." Mississippi Lou nodded and turned to walk outside. "Where are you going?" Li asked hurriedly. Although she didn't show anything in the past year, Mississippi Lou only taught her one precious apprentice with all her heart. How could she not care about her? If she were in the Wu Kingdom now, she would have already led the masters of the Lu League to break into the imperial palace and take the head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom. Mississippi Lou turned around and said, "I'll go ask Chief Sue what tricks he taught you 2 days ago." Li's expression changed. This was more dangerous than her breaking into the imperial palace. He quickly walked in front of her and changed the topic. "Rui, do you remember the Taoist who followed us back from the Qi Kingdom?" "Of course I remember." Mississippi Lou glanced at him. She had only met a few grandmasters. How could she forget? "I heard from Sue that the Taoist priest was about the same age as Sue, but he looked like he was 2 generations younger than Sue. Do you know why?" Mississippi Lou pursed her lips and said, "That's nothing. Taoist Kung Fu focuses on maintaining one's health. It has a certain effect of prolonging one's life and retaining one's youthfulness. That Taoist must be practicing a top-notch youth-retaining technique. I heard from my father before." As she said this, she seemed to recall something from the past. Her tone paused, and her face darkened slightly. He was about the same age as Sue, but he looked so young. Li had been eyeing old Taoist Yuan for a long time. His interest was immediately piqued, and he hurriedly asked, What did our father say?" "Mississippi." Lou came back to her senses. She glared at him and said, "Who's with our father? What you said isn't right." Li looked at her and explained, "You and Rui are sisters. Your father is Rui's father. I'm Rui's husband. Rui's father is my father. In this way, your father is my father. Besides, we're a family." Mississippi Lou did not argue with him. She waved her hand and interrupted him. "My father used to say our father." Li corrected her again. In the past, our father said that he had seen a Taoist priest who had cultivated the Taoist technique of retaining one's youth to the extreme. He had already lived for 60 years, but he still had the face of a young man. His appearance would not change until he died. Speaking of this, Mississippi Lou did not care at all. She changed the topic and said, "However, although this kung fu can maintain one's appearance, it doesn't help martial arts much. It also needs to buy all kinds of precious medicinal materials. Not to mention the time and effort it takes, the silver alone is not something ordinary people can afford. It's just a useless kung fu." Li said indifferently, "We're not ordinary people. It's not a big deal to spend more money." Mississippi Lou frowned and said, "The silver is not the point. The point is that it's a waste of time. It's better to use it to learn some practical kung fu." Li shook his head and said, "You can't say that. Rui, you're 19 years old this year. It's the most beautiful time of a woman's life. But can you guarantee that you'll still look like this in 10 or 20 years? Let's not talk about other things. In a few years, although you'll keep practicing kung fu and your figure won't change, wrinkles will appear on your face. Your skin will become loose and lose its luster. In a few years, you'll be old and your pearls will turn yellow." "Old and pearls turn yellow?" Mississippi Lou looked at him. Li could hear the cracking of his knuckles. "Pretend I didn't say anything." Li turned his head and walked away. As he walked, he said, "If you think it's useless, then forget it. I'll let Rui practice. I'll let Xiao Huan practice too. By then, you'll be the only one." Mississippi Lou leaped slightly and appeared in front of Li. She asked calmly, "What if I'm the only one?" Li walked around her and said softly, "Only you can experience the complete life of a woman. As a woman, who wouldn't want to remain young and beautiful forever? However, there's a price to pay for everything. Using a large amount of time to cultivate the Taoist youthful but useless technique of retaining one's looks would affect one's martial arts path. But if she didn't learn it, her sister and Xiao Huan could keep their looks. After a few years, she would be the only one who would become old and withered. This was naturally something she couldn't tolerate." Mississippi Lou clenched her fists and looked at Li, who was about to slip out of the door. She said in a low voice, "Come back." Mississippi Lou looked at him and asked, "Taoism's kung fu has never been taught to outsiders. Not to mention this kind of top-notch art of retaining youth. That Taoist Yuan is a grandmaster and has a high position in Taoism. Are you sure you can handle him?" Li smiled and looked straight at her. He said, "In this world, there's no one I can't handle." He could even handle a monk, let alone a Taoist. Although those people had no desires and only wanted to cultivate, it didn't mean they didn't care about anything. A few Taoist canons that didn't exist in this world pointed them to a few more paths of cultivation. It was just a useless secret manual. How could Taoist Yuan be reluctant to give it to them? With one more Taoist scripture, he would be able to impart all of his years of experience in practicing this technique. With one more book, he would have a consultant who would be at his beck and call in the future. With one more book, in order to prevent Mississippi Lou from aging so early, Li Yi's hands were sore. Take it. He tossed 2 booklets to her. One of them recorded the youth-retaining technique, and the other recorded the insights and experiences of old Taoist Yuan and the seniors of their sect when they cultivated this technique. It would allow people to take fewer detours when cultivating. Although Taoist Yuan wouldn't give him a fake one out of respect for the Lord of Tao and virtue, it was necessary to let Rui and second great-uncle examine it first. After watching Mississippi Lou go to Rui's room, he sat down at the stone table in the courtyard. He took out a few pieces of paper from his sleeve and opened them one by one. In the end, the Chui family couldn't sit still. This time, they had to be wary of not only the Chui family, but also the Chu family. Ever since Grand Tutor Chu had returned to the capital, he had spent most of his time in seclusion. But recently, he had frequently visited the famous Confucian scholars near the capital. No one knew what they had talked about, but the scholars of the capital had frequently gathered, and there had been many movements. In the end, the Chu family still made a move. Even though they were already mentally prepared, they still felt a little complicated when it happened. Her Royal Highness was already very famous among the scholars in the world, but if they didn't target the princess, Grand Tutor Chu, Li Yi crumpled all the papers into a ball and sighed softly. Mississippi Lou walked out of the room and looked at him. "Oh yes, there's one more thing. I asked, but Chief Su said he didn't teach you any techniques." He didn't?" Li looked surprised. After a while, he nodded and said, "Oh, if he didn't, then he didn't. Maybe I remembered wrongly." Chapter 887. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was cracking melon seeds. Occasionally, he would throw a few melon seeds into the lake to attract a few fish. The proud Lolita, with her sharp eyes and quick hands, caught them with a small net. She then quickly ran to her private courtyard and put them in a transparent fish tank. When only the 2 of them were left in the pavilion, Li Mingzhu stood up from the stone bench and said slowly, "Grand Tutor Chu has been going around these days. He has gathered some influential scholars and encouraged the scholars in the capital and the vicinity of the capital to write a letter to ask Father to recall the king of Shu from Shuzhou and have him enter the Eastern Palace to preside over the court." What did His Majesty say? Li Yi had already peeled a plate of melon seeds. He picked up the plate and gestured to her. Her Royal Highness took the plate and gathered all the melon seeds that he had spent a long time peeling into her hands. Li Yi secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and wondered if he had expressed the wrong intention just now. When he handed the plate to her, he clearly wanted her to pinch a few seeds as a gesture. The princess ate all the melon seeds in a way that made Li Yi envious. Then she said, "Father has not expressed his opinion, but this matter has greatly affected the scholars in the capital. It is not a long-term solution to leave it like this. Moreover, Grand Tutor Chu has already begun to visit some officials in the court. It should be for this matter. Many of those people were his students. After all, they have a righteous cause, and Grand Tutor Chu has personally come forward. I'm afraid the same method used by the Chui family and Grand Tutor Chu had a completely different effect. After all, the latter was simply the benchmark in the hearts of the scholars of the Jing Kingdom. With a casual wave of his hand, countless people would echo him. There were peaches and plums all over the world. To be precise, the old emperor was also one of those peaches and plums. Grand Tutor Chu's influence in the Jing Kingdom could no longer be described as 100 people at a single call. If it weren't for the fact that the king of Shu had made such a grave mistake, which could be described as a bastard or a rebellion, he wouldn't even need to make such a big fuss. All he had to do was stand out and make his stand clear. Naturally, countless people would follow him. But then again, Li Yi also felt that the old emperor treated the king of Shu and the Chui family differently from the other princes. It was even somewhat out of line with his usual style of doing things. They had been monarch and minister, or friends for so long, and there was a tacit understanding between the Chui family and the king of Shu. Don't worry, you know His Majesty's temperament. Li Yi smiled and said, what he has decided is not so easy to change. That Tsundra Loli had already released the fish, washed her hands, and ran over. As soon as she entered the pavilion, she asked Li Yi, Sir, where are the melon seeds you peeled for me? I want to eat them all at once. Then she saw the empty plate on the table. Sir, she pouted and looked at Li Yi with an aggrieved expression. Li Yi looked at Mingzu, and the proud Lolita followed his gaze to look at Mingzu. Mingzu stared blankly at Li Yi, and the proud Lolita's gaze shifted to him again. Sir, Li Yi helplessly pinched her face and said, Okay. I'll peel more for you right away. On a grassy slope across the lake, a figure crawling there finally put down the binoculars in his hands. Something's wrong indeed. Li Xian hung the binoculars around his neck and slid down the slope. Through many long-distance observations, he could already confirm that Mingzu and Li Yi did not have the kind of relationship that he had always thought. They were using this relationship to cover up something that they did not want him to know. What was it that made Mingzu willing to put down her reputation? The fire of curiosity in his heart burned even more intensely. On the way back to the Academy of Sciences, he ordered a guard behind him. Bring me the person from yesterday. The guard responded. Not long after, a skinny old man was brought in. After walking into the room, the old man immediately bowed respectfully. This commoner greets Your Highness. Dispense with the formalities. Li Xian waved his hand and looked at him. He asked suspiciously, You said that you can guess what other people are saying by looking at their lips? The old man immediately said, Your Highness, this commoner has studied lip reading for decades. Although I can't say that I can guess everything correctly, I can roughly guess it. Teach me. Li Xian looked at him and said, Didn't you want to pass down your unique skill? I'll leave a place for you in the Academy of Sciences. The old man was stunned. He immediately knelt on the ground and said repeatedly, Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you, Your Highness. The Chu family. The middle-aged man helped the violently coughing Grand Tutor Chu back to his room. After a moment of hesitation, he said, Father, why don't you not go out for the next 2 days? You just recovered from your cold. The doctor said that you should rest well at home. Since it's already begun, it can't be stopped. Grand Tutor Chu covered his mouth and coughed. How has Pinger been these days? The middle-aged man sighed. He locks himself in his room every day and doesn't say a word. But this makes me even more worried. Grand Tutor Chu turned to look in a certain direction and murmured, It's my fault. I've restrained him too much in the past. Everyone, let's not be restrained today. We won't go home until we're drunk. At the Chui family banquet, Chui Qingming faced the crowd and laughed. He then raised his cup and downed it in one gulp. Lord Grand Tutor is willing to help us. This time, we definitely won't lose. Lord Grand Tutor is still the best. We usually don't even get to see those great scholars, much less ask them to help us. This time, even His Majesty will have no choice but to agree to recall the king of Shu back to the capital. The letter of the people has been presented. Now, we're just waiting for an opportunity. In these 2 years, the king of Shu's faction had suffered a series of blows. If they didn't do something to raise their morale, they would probably never be able to regain their confidence. And to them, what could be more important than helping the king of Shu return to the capital? Come, Brother Chui, let me toast you. The crowd repeatedly toasted Chui Qingming. Although he was the second son of the Chui family, during this period of time, the family head, Chui Qingze, had been depressed. Chui Qingming made all the decisions in the Chui family. Although he wasn't the family head, he was no different from the family head. In a corner of the banquet, Tseng Shichen turned to look at someone beside him. Why aren't you drinking? Chun Chong shook his head. This wine doesn't have any taste. I think so too. Tseng Shichen smiled and picked up a purple clay teapot. They drink wine, we drink tea. Qin family. After dinner, Qin Yin raised his head to look at the old man and asked, Lord Father, what Grand Tutor Chu said today? Qin Xiang glanced at the person below, who was engrossed in eating. He shook his head and said, My Qin family will not participate in this matter. Although the brothers of the Qin family who were officials in the court still had countless doubts, since their Lord Father had already spoken, they could only nod. On the way back to the room, the large man asked the Qin family's fifth master in surprise, Fifth master, who is that old man who came to our house today? Why does even the prime minister have to bow to him? The Qin family's fifth master explained, That is Grand Tutor Chu. When Lord Father was young, he was also his disciple. The large man still wanted to ask more, but the Qin family's fifth master's footsteps paused. Then, he quickened his pace and walked to the door. Seeing a figure at the door, he asked in surprise, Lord Father, why have you come? I couldn't sleep, so I took a walk. Qin Xiang shook his head and said, It's getting late. You should rest early. The Qin family's fifth master nodded. Qin Xiang turned to leave, but his footsteps paused again. He turned his head and asked, Here, what do you think of the current court? Didn't Father say that the current court has rarely been so clear in decades, and that I shouldn't listen to the nonsense of outsiders? The Qin family's fifth master paused, then said, Moreover, I'm not in the court, so I really can't see clearly. Qin Xiang raised his head to look at the dark clouds covering the night sky, where not a single star could be seen. He sighed and muttered, The sky is about to change. I just can't see clearly. The proud Lolita, who had recently come to their house to freeload, frequently looked at her dazed husband and reminded him, Sir, the meat in the pot is cooked. Li came back to his senses. Looking at the slightly curled-up lamb meat in the pot, he shook his head and said, There's no rush. Let's wait for it to float up. Chapter 888. Led by Grand Tutor Chu. Several famous scholars in the capital are no longer just asking for the king of Shu to return and take charge of the Eastern Palace. In the past 2 days, there have been rumors among the officials they influenced that you are the sycophant who obstructed the peace talks between the Qi and Jing kingdoms, stirring up a foul atmosphere in the court. Li didn't continue her words. Instead, he asked, Tomorrow is the 13th. How are the preparations going? Mingzi nodded and said, Father has already personally issued the edict. It can be announced at any time. You can arrange the time yourself. Then, she frowned and looked at him. If you really had any ideas, you should have told me in advance. Their target this time is you. Don't always look so indifferent. It doesn't matter if I didn't, Li Yi said somewhat helplessly. The Chu family has been caught red-handed, so we have no choice but to work hard. In terms of influence in the imperial court, all of us combined are no match for that Grand Tutor. If they want to talk, let them talk. We can't shut their mouths. And Mingzi was startled. She asked in confusion, What blackmailed the Chu family? The Chu family. Li Yi had just opened his mouth when he suddenly looked at Li Xian, who was standing to the side. He asked, Is there something on my face? No. Li Xian shook his head without hesitation. Then why do you keep looking at me? Li Xian shrugged. Other than you and Mingzi, there are only the two of you here. If I don't look at you, am I supposed to look at myself? It was one thing to look, but to look for an hour and mumble while looking was quite abnormal. He glanced at Li Xian and said to Mingzi, Let's go over there and talk. On the bustling streets of the capital, the goddess of Luo Shui tilted her head and looked at Li Yi. She asked in confusion, Where are we going? Li Yi said casually, We have nothing to do anyway. Let's just walk around. Zhang Zumo looked at him and asked, Do you remember what day it is today? Li Yi was puzzled. April 13th, what's wrong? It's nothing. She shook her head and looked ahead. She pointed and said, There's a new jewelry shop over there. Let's go take a look. The goddess of Luo Shui wasn't in a good mood today. Along the way, she didn't buy anything. She lowered her head and was lost in her thoughts. Only when the two of them were far away from the bustling city and there were fewer and fewer people around them did she finally come back to her senses. She looked around and looked at Li Yi. She asked doubtfully, Why did we walk here? Li Yi raised his head and looked at the plaque above the gate, which read Zeng Residence. He held her hand and smiled. Let's go in. Zeng Zumo's body almost subconsciously paused. This used to be the place she was most familiar with, but also the place she was most unfamiliar with. It had carried her sweetest and happiest memories, and was also the beginning of the longest nightmare she had ever had. She held Li Yi's hand tightly and looked back at him. Their eyes met for a moment. Then she turned back and let out a long sigh. She nodded and said, "Let's go." The two of them stepped on the stone steps. Li Yi pushed the door open. The heavy wooden door made a creaking sound, revealing a dozen figures behind the door. Uncle Ho. Zeng Zumo looked at the old man who was bowing at the front. After a moment of daze, she looked back with surprise on her face. Uncle Chi. Nanny Hua. Xiao Mei, you're Xiao Mei. How did you miss? The dozen people all bowed. The old man at the front raised his head and said with a smile, Miss, welcome home. Her mind was blank. Holding Li Yi's hand, she was led into the Zeng residence by him. Only then did she realize that this place was completely different from the last two times she had been here. More than a decade ago, when she was still in the Zeng residence, there should be a stone pavilion on the left side of the garden. Whenever it rained, she didn't want to stay in the stuffy room. She would sit in the stone pavilion, watching the mist in the sky and listening to the pitter-patter of rain. She didn't see the stone pavilion the last two times she came to the Zeng residence. It must have been torn down. This time, it miraculously appeared in front of her eyes. Whether it was in the position or the direction it was facing, it was exactly the same as she remembered. The previous two times, she saw a few small houses that didn't exist for more than a decade. They must have been built in recent years. This time, they disappeared as well, and an empty space under the wall reappeared. A long time ago, when the weather was fine, she would play shuttlecock with the maids in the Zeng residence. In the entire Zeng residence, she was the only one who could play shuttlecock without hitting the ground after 100 times. The decoration in the front hall was also very different from the last time. Tables, chairs, screens. These things began to overlap with the Zeng residence in her memory. This was the Zeng residence, the only Zeng residence in her heart. She looked at Li Yi and wanted to ask him something. However, Li Yi had already pulled her into his arms and whispered in her ear, "This is your birthday present. Do you like it?" Only then did she realize what he meant when he asked her, "Do you like it here?" The last time they came to the Zeng family's house, he asked her, "Do you like it here?" She didn't know how he got the Zeng residence from those people. She only knew that this was his birthday present for her, and that was enough. The imperial edict has arrived. A sharp and piercing voice suddenly rang out from outside. She hurriedly escaped from Li Yi's embrace and saw two fair-skinned, beardless men walking in. The eunuch glanced at them and said coldly, "His Majesty has an edict. Kneel and accept it." Whoosh! Other than Li Yi and Zeng Zumo, all the servants of the Zeng residence knelt on the ground and didn't dare to raise their heads in fear. Zeng Zumo was about to kneel as well, but Li Yi grabbed her wrist and glared at the eunuch. The eunuch shivered and immediately put on a smile that was uglier than crying. He quickly said, "Miss, you don't have to kneel. His Majesty specifically said that the court has wronged Sir Zeng. Miss, just stand and listen." He opened the edict and said in a loud voice, "The edict reads, the previous Minister of Revenue, Zhang Shiji, was loyal and dutiful. He worked hard and made great contributions. However, he was framed by a villain and the court misjudged him. Now that the investigation has been carried out, we should set things right. Reward the Zeng clan with 10,000 gold and 1,000 bolts of silk. The Zeng clan will be restored. Sir Zeng was wronged and will be posthumously conferred the title of Marquis of Loyalty." After reading it, he looked up anxiously and said, "Miss Zeng, please accept the edict." Seeing that she was standing there in a daze, Li Yi took the edict. The two eunuchs sighed in relief and left immediately. Li Yi held the imperial edict, looked at her, and said in a low voice, "The imperial edict begins with the imperial edict. It is meant to announce to the world that the Zeng family was wrongly accused, and the world will return their innocence to them." She looked up with tears in her eyes. This This is also your... Li wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and said softly, "This is the second gift I'm giving you." As soon as he finished speaking, his lips were kissed by her. It wasn't a light touch like before. Her tongue pried open his teeth. Although the movement was jerky, it was wild and passionate like never before. The servants of his own clan had already left. When Tsing Shichin came in, he happened to see this scene. Ahem! After standing there for a long time, he finally couldn't help but cough. The goddess of Luo Shui was like a frightened rabbit. She pushed Li away in a hurry and clasped her hands together. She said helplessly, "Second uncle, clang." Tsing Shichin felt like he was struck by lightning. The thing in his hand fell to the ground. Chapter 889. Tsing Shichin hurriedly picked up a box from the ground and put on the table. "This is the contract of Steward Ho and the others. From now on, let them stay here." The blush on Zheng Zumo's face hadn't disappeared. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at anyone. "Thank you, second uncle." Hearing this title again after so many years, Tsing Shichin couldn't hide the joy on his face. He also let out a long sigh of relief. She was willing to call him second uncle, which meant that she had let go of the knot in her heart from 13 years ago. This was also the knot in his heart that he couldn't let go of for a long time. "Then, I'll leave first." Tsing Shichin looked at them, especially at Li Yi's face, for a long time. He then turned around and left, closing the door on his way out. The Luo Shui goddess still had her head down. Li Yi sat on the chair and pulled her over. "He's gone. Let's continue." "Continue what?" The Luo Shui goddess's voice was almost inaudible. Li Yi didn't answer. Instead, he used his actions to tell her what to continue. After an unknown amount of time, she lazily leaned against Li Yi's chest. Her eyes were blurred as she murmured, "Do you still remember what it was like when we first met?" Li Yi grabbed her hand and said, "At that time, also grabbed your hand like this, and you still thought I was a lecher. You were a lecher." Zheng Zumo removed her hand from his waist and said with a blush, "So be it. It's good to be a lecher." Li Yi put his hand back and said shamelessly. She symbolically struggled for a while before letting him be. She murmured, "I still remember that time in the Jadeite courtyard. You rushed up from below the stage and asked me if I had transmigrated from Earth. From then on, I was curious. What is Earth, and what is transmigration?" Now that Li Yi thought about it, he found a little funny. Not long after he came to this world, he happened to hear someone singing Immortal Magpie Bridge, which only existed in another world. Naturally, he was surprised and happy, but in the end, it was just a misunderstanding. However, if not for that beautiful misunderstanding, there would be no such scene. He couldn't help hugging her tightly and said with a smile, "It's a secret. She grew up here and naturally had an unforgettable feeling for this place." When the two walked out of the room, Li Yi had already discussed with her. They would go back to Willow Lane to tidy up and move here with Juan and Ruoqing in a few days. She had never dared to do something like that before. Moreover, she did it in front of these people whom she had known since she was young. Therefore, after she walked out of the room, she blushed and lowered her head, especially when she saw Tsing Shichin standing in front of her. Even her white and tender neck was covered with a layer of pink. This time, the Chui family's target is not only the king of Shu, but also you. Tsing Shichin glared at him vaguely before saying, "It may not be peaceful in the near future. Be careful." Zheng Zumo looked at Li Yi worriedly and asked, "Are they going to do something bad to you?" Li Yi helped her tidy up her slightly messy hair and said, "Don't worry. Who do you think your husband is? The Chui family is more than 1,000 years too early to make trouble for me. Now is not the time. No matter what happens, it's best to wait and see." Tsing Shichin looked at him and said, "The Chu family's influence is too wide. If you can't kill them in one strike, there will be endless trouble. Now is not the time for you to act." Tsing Shichin said it was not the right time. Li Yi could naturally understand. For example, Grand Tutor Chu's precious grandson had some strange hobbies and was related to the missing girl some time ago. But because he was the grandson of the Chu family, he was secretly let go. If this matter was revealed at a normal time, it would at most affect the Chu family's reputation a little. With Grand Tutor Chu around, the Chu family could still stand tall. However, if he was the happiest person in the Chu clan and used the clan's accumulated reputation to do something, it would be like a sharp blade that could destroy the foundation of the clan. Moreover, if they didn't drag things out, who knew who else would jump out at the crucial moment in court? In a pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was teaching Yongning how to fish. She had almost completely integrated into this world. After all, she was still young and her worldview had not formed. When she grew older, she probably wouldn't have a clear impression of the other world. How can you still sit here? Li Xian walked over from behind and said with a frown, news just came from the palace. The court is almost in an uproar. Even Uncle Huang was alarmed and went straight to the Great Hall. You're actually fishing here? Then what can I do? Li Yi glanced at him and said, fight with those old scholars? Won't they have another reason to impeach me? The matter of your impeachment has already been suppressed by Ming. Li Xian shook his head and said, in court, led by Grand Tutor Chu and accompanied by 4 scholars, those people are jointly asking Uncle Huang to issue an edict to transfer the king of Shu back to the capital. Li Yi held Yongning's small hand and helped her stabilize the fishing rod. He then gently pulled it up and a fat carp jumped out of the water. The little girl let go of the fishing rod and shook Li Yi's arm. She said excitedly, brother, a fish has taken the bait. Li Yi patted her head and said with a smile, this fish, I'll make fish soup for Yongning later in the Great Hall. His Majesty had just lost his temper. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was heavy and deathly silent. Grand Tutor Chu looked up and got up from his chair. Leaning on his walking stick, he moved step by step to the center of the Great Hall. His Majesty's body is unwell. It's best to appoint a crown prince as soon as possible to establish the foundation of the country and settle the hearts of the people. The king of Shu is the son of concubine Shui and is also His Majesty's eldest son. He has a respected status and is in line with the ancestral rules. He is the best candidate to live in the East Palace. He covered his mouth and coughed a few times. He put down his walking stick, cupped his fists, and bowed. He said loudly, Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. Among the hundreds of officials, 4 white-haired old men walked out and stood behind Grand Tutor Chu. They bowed deeply and said loudly, Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. In the Great Hall, many officials looked at each other and walked out. Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. Everyone's voices resounded throughout the hall. Even though there were a few different voices, they were quickly drowned out. Cui Qingming was also in the crowd with a smile on his face. They don't look like courtiers at all. In front of the crowd, Prime Minister Shun's face darkened. He said angrily, What are they doing? They are forcing the emperor to abdicate. Seeing this, Qin Xiang shook his head with a complicated expression. Emperor Jing slowly rose from his throne and looked down. His gaze finally stopped on Grand Tutor Chu's face. His chest rose and fell slightly as he slowly said, Grand Tutor, are you forcing us? I dare not force your Majesty. Grand Tutor Chu lifted his head, his gaze calm. I'm doing this for the world, for the people of the Jing kingdom, and for His Majesty. He tidied up his robe, knelt on the ground, and said loudly, Your Majesty, please issue the decree. Your Majesty, please issue the decree. Your Majesty, please issue the decree. The sound waves grew louder and louder, as if they were going to overturn the roof of the Great Hall. Emperor Jing revealed a sorrowful expression. He pointed downwards and murmured, You all. Changde immediately stepped forward and said anxiously, Your Majesty, the dragon's body is more important. And Mingzhu quickly walked over from his side and said, Bring Imperial Father to rest first. After a few eunuchs accompanied Emperor Jing and left, she walked down the steps and looked at Grand Tutor Chu and asked, Grand Tutor, how long are you going to kneel for? Grand Tutor Chu raised his head and said expressionlessly, "As long as His Majesty does not issue the decree, this old man will not get up." Chapter 890. Li Yi and Li Xian were waiting outside the hall. When an imperial physician came out, Li Xian quickly walked over and asked anxiously, "How is Uncle Huang?" The imperial physician sighed and shook his head. Li Xian's expression changed. He grabbed his collar and asked, "Is it serious?" "Why do you say that, Your Highness?" The imperial physician was surprised and said, "His Majesty was just temporarily stimulated. His mood was too unstable, causing his condition to relapse." Li Xian relaxed and glared at him. "Then why did you shake your head just now?" "My neck was a little stiff just now, so I moved it a little," the imperial physician sighed and then said, "However, you still have to pay more attention in the future. His Majesty's condition really can't take any more stimulation." "Get out, get out, get out." Li Xian kicked the imperial physician's buttocks and waved his hand impatiently. After the eunuch reported, the two entered the hall. Emperor Jing was lying on a soft couch inside and waved at them from a distance. Li Xian quickly walked over and said, "Uncle Huang, the dragon's health is more important. You can let Mingzu handle these matters of the court. If they want to kneel, let them kneel until they die in the hall. It will save us some trouble." "What a stupid thing to say." Prince Ning glared at him and said, "If the current Grand Tutor of the court kneels until he dies in the Golden Hall, how will the world talk about His Majesty?" "I don't mind." Emperor Jing shook his head and looked at Li Yi. He said, "You have been wronged. What you have done is beneficial to the country and the people. It is a good deed that will last for generations, but you are regarded as a sycophant." Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing's pale face and said, "Whether it is a good deed or a bad deed, the future generations will judge. Moreover, the people are not stupid. They can't be toyed with as they like. I believe that the world will naturally give me justice." Seeing the fatigue on his face, Li Xian stood up and said, "Uncle Huang, please rest well. We won't disturb you any longer." After leaving the hall, the smile on Li Xian's face immediately disappeared. He said angrily, "Are these old fellows trying to force me to abdicate and rebel?" Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said, "You just can't stay calm when something happens. Don't worry, let's go and take a look first." In the main hall, Emperor Jing covered his chest and coughed a few times before slowly saying, "I can feel that I don't have much time left." Pain appeared in King Ning's eyes. "Imperial brother." Emperor Jing looked out of the hall. After a long time, he said, "At first, I also thought that you should take this position." Without waiting for him to finish, Prince Ning immediately bowed. "Imperial brother, you must not do this. We know that you don't want to be trapped in this position. Otherwise, the one lying here right now would be you." Emperor Jing narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "In the end, this world should belong to those young people." Prince Ning nodded and said, "Mingzu and Xian did not disappoint us. The Chui family has the ambition of wolves." Emperor Jing looked at Prince Ning again. "This time, I'm afraid you will have to personally go back to Qing and Fu." Prince Ning bowed and said in a low voice, "As you command." When Li Yi and Li Xian walked to the main hall, they coincidentally ran into Mingzu coming out from inside. She asked, "What's the situation inside?" Mingzu shook her head and said, "With Grand Tutor Chu as the leader, there are more than 20 people still kneeling inside." Li walked into the main hall and saw that other than the group of people kneeling on the ground, the other officials had already left. The elder at the very front was kneeling on the ground. He must be the Grand Tutor Chu that he had met twice. He walked to the front. Grand Tutor Chu heard the sound of footsteps and slowly raised his head. He hurriedly waved his hand and said, "Grand Tutor, there is no need to be so courteous. Please rise. I really cannot accept such a great courtesy from you." "How dare you? How dare you?" Before Grand Tutor Chu could speak, a series of harsh voices came from behind him. The four scholars looked at him angrily. The officials of the court behind him all shrank their necks and did not say a word. Grand Tutor Chu's expression was calm as he lightly said, "I kneel for the world and the ancestral system." When the emperor is ill, the Eastern Palace should be established to stabilize the court and the people. This is the rules set by the ancestors. Do you really want to be a treacherous official who disregards the ancestral system and causes trouble for the world? Such a heavy crime. This junior can't afford to bear it. He shook his head and bent down. In a small voice, he said, I am only worried that your grandson, a young man in the prime of his youth, will injure his legs if he kneels for too long. Grand Tutor, you're already so old. If something bad happens to you and you collapse, I presume that official Chui, who does not wish to reveal his name, will be very sad? The old man looked at him, and his gaze suddenly froze. What did you say? He looked at him and asked, forming a clique for personal gain and pressuring the emperor in the Golden Palace. Is this the righteousness that Grand Tutor, as a scholar of the Jing kingdom? Grand Tutor Chu's gaze slightly froze. He coldly said, My righteousness is not for you to judge. Grand Tutor's reputation is illustrious. Naturally, I cannot judge. He once again lowered his voice and slowly said, I wonder if those women who have been trampled upon by your grandson, who have been seriously injured in both body and mind, can be judged. You, Grand Tutor Chu's expression changed. He stood up shakily with the help of his walking stick and pointed it at Fan Xian. In a trembling voice, he said, You traitor, don't you dare sully the Chu family's clean name. The Chu family's clean name for 100 years is not easy to obtain. Grand Tutor, please reconsider. Don't casually use it to gamble. He shook his head and turned to leave. The people in the hall looked at the dazed Grand Tutor Chu and looked at each other. An old man finally could not help but ask, Grand Tutor. Grand Tutor Chu waved his hand and said, Get up. We will discuss this matter at length when we return. Watching the people leave the hall from afar, Li Xian asked in confusion, What did you say to that old man? Li watched the group leave and said, I told him that the old man's body is weak and that kneeling for too long is not good for his health. That's all. What else? He shook his head and said, This is for his own good. If he still does not listen, then he can only blame himself. Li Xian shook his head and said resolutely, Impossible. That old man is as stubborn as a rock, let alone kneeling until his legs are broken. Even if he kneels to death, he will not easily compromise. He waved his hand and said, Fine. Actually, I told him that His Highness said that if they do not get up, they will all be beheaded and hung at the palace gates as lanterns. The Chu family will be exterminated, the men will be exiled, and the women will be sold to the brothels. They will not be allowed to sleep without receiving 100 customers a day. Just ask him if he is afraid. Li Xian was stunned and murmured, Isn't this too cruel? Li patted his shoulder again and said, If you are not so cruel, they will not be afraid. Outside the palace gates, Chui Qingming slowly followed behind Grand Tutor Chu and said, Don't worry, Grand Tutor. All the evidence of that incident has already been destroyed. What he said is nothing more than slanderous slander and framing others. No matter what he does now, even if he finds those women and points them out, people will only think that he is desperate and will not be able to do anything. His eyes flickered and he said firmly, Now that the situation has been decided, as long as Grand Tutor puts in a little more effort, the great event will be possible. Chapter 891. Jingdu had always been a troublesome place, but too many things had happened in recent days. First, a fugitive killed someone on the Lantern Festival in a cruel way. Then, a woman near Jingdu disappeared inexplicably. The wanted poster of the fugitive had been posted all over Jingdu, but there was no result until now. The case of the missing woman was solved, but it was not perfect. 2 other women had not been found. Later, the envoy of the Qi Kingdom came from afar to negotiate for peace. It was publicized quite enthusiastically for 2 days, but there was no news about it after that. In the middle of April, it was said that, led by the Grand Tutor and several famous scholars, forced the emperor to issue an edict to summon the king of Shu, the eldest son of the emperor, back to Jingdu and live in the East Palace. Everyone knew why the king of Shu was expelled from Jingdu at that time. If he had taken another step forward, it would have been a great crime equivalent to rebellion. Merely being expelled was already a mercy beyond the law. It was said that on that day in the hall, His Majesty was so angry that his old illness relapsed. The Grand Tutor and the others knelt in the hall and refused to get up. They did not know what happened after that. In any case, the imperial edict to summon the King of Shu back had not been issued. However, it was faintly heard that the Grand Tutor Chu and those scholars were going to carry out some activities to clean up the side of the emperor, aiming at the Minister of Honor, Li, County Marquis Li, who was the most favored by the emperor. Everyone knew that County Marquis Li and the princess had done a lot of good things for the world and helped many people live a good life. However, this kind of thing was planned by the scholars in the upper class. They couldn't participate in it at all. Of course, they wouldn't participate in it. After all, this matter was led by the Grand Tutor, who was like a saint in the hearts of the people. Even those who were very firm in heart couldn't help but be shaken when thinking of this. This was a game between the bigwigs, and they could only watch from afar. What was strange was that no matter how the opponents slandered, County Marquis Li didn't do anything, which made it difficult for countless people to guess. After all, this matter didn't only involve himself. Even the officials and forces in Jingdu, who had some relations with him, were greatly affected because of this matter. In the government office of the capital, County Magistrate Liu was having a headache because of a street fight. Fighting was just a small matter, but when the people involved in the fight, one was a member of the Chui family, and the other was just a commoner, and the Chui family was not in the right, the matter was a little difficult to deal with. In front of the hall, an old man revealed a smile and said, "Hee, Lord Liu, how should this case be judged? Please quickly give us a definite answer. My young master will have a banquet in a while." County Magistrate Liu couldn't remember when was the last time someone talked to him like this in the court. Could it be that this housekeeper of the Chui residence thought that since Lord Li was at a disadvantage, the Chui family could be more arrogant in the capital? He looked at the disdainful young man standing in the middle of the hall, waved his hand and said, "Fighting in the street, disregarding the law. You will be punished with 10 strokes of the cane and driven out of the county government." In the court, the young man's expression changed, and he shouted, "How dare you!" The old man was startled, and his face also became gloomy. He said in a low voice, "Lord Liu, don't forget who my young master is, and don't forget who you are. What a coincidence. I'm not afraid of threats at all, especially threats from your Chui family." County Magistrate Liu smiled and said, "This man disturbed the court and dared to threaten me. For the sake of your age, I won't beat him. Just throw him out as well." Seeing the government runners drag the 2 people out, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He clenched his fists, looked at the sky, and murmured, "Lord Li, what are you thinking?" His face alternated between doubt, hesitation, worry, and fear. After a while, all kinds of complex emotions turned into determination. He walked out of the hall and ordered a government runner, "Prepare the carriage. I need to go out. Shanning, move a little to the right. Hold Yongning. Hold her, not her head. Never mind. Put your hand on her shoulder." Li instructed the proud Lolita, and then picked up the brush again and drew on the spread paper. The weather was good today, and he originally planned to draw a family portrait. Rui was holding Li Duan, Xiao Huan and Rui were standing on her side, and finally he would Photoshop himself, and this family portrait would be perfect. However, the proud Lolita came over, and she insisted on joining in. With her, of course, Yongning, so the small family became a big family. The little guy couldn't stay quiet for long. After a while, he started to cry and make a fuss. Rui had to coax him. Fortunately, her part had been finished. As long as he added others, it would not be difficult for him. After finishing the painting, he sent the proud Lolita and Yongning to play, and then he had time to lie in the yard, enjoying a moment of peace. Not long after he closed his eyes, a pair of hands appeared on his shoulders, gently massaging him. Rui's voice was soft. "I've heard about the things that are spreading outside." Li opened his eyes and asked in surprise, "What is it?" "They say that hubby is a sycophant." Li sighed and said, "I thought I hid it well, but I never expected them to see through me In fact, from a certain point of view, Old Man Chu and company were right. At the very least, he had hidden the fact that he wanted to make Princess Royal Empress from the old emperor. If one were to really think about it, compared to this treasonous matter, what the Chui family did was nothing. Rui wasn't surprised by his words. After some thought, she said solemnly, "If hubby is a sycophant, then I'm the wife of the sycophant. When the sycophant and his wife join forces, there's no one to be afraid of." Li Yi grabbed her hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry. One sycophant is enough to deal with these people. The sycophant's son is crying again. It's best you coax the sycophant's wife." Rui went to coax the restless Li Duan. Mississippi Lu walked over from behind and stood in front of him. She looked down at him and asked, "How much longer are you going to wait?" Lying on the recliner to look at Mississippi Lu, he felt like he was looking up at her. He shook his head and said, "Those are all great Confucian scholars. In terms of influence, I can't compare to them. I have an idea. Rui, why don't you visit those stubborn old fogies one by one at night? You don't have to beat them to death. All you have to do is beat them until they are paralyzed and unable to take care of themselves. That way, they won't be able to run around stirring up trouble, all right?" Mississippi Lu simply agreed. The next moment, she disappeared in front of Li Yi. Suddenly losing sight of Mississippi Lu, Li Yi was startled. He immediately jumped up from the rocking chair and chased after her. He shouted, "Wait a minute. Let's discuss it again. Maybe there's another way." He didn't catch up with Mississippi Lu. Instead, he saw Li Xian and the eldest princess who came together. When the three of them walked back in, someone also came out from another hide door. A middle-aged man said apologetically, "Prime Minister Qin, I'm really sorry. My father hasn't been feeling well recently and is resting in bed. He won't see anyone." Prime Minister Qin looked at the two carriages parked in front of the Chu residence. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the middle-aged man and said lightly, "I have something to say. Tell the Grand Tutor that Qin Wen is grateful for his teaching back then. But today, he wants to destroy the pillar of the Jing Kingdom." I beg to differ. Inside the hall, Li Yi had just asked Li Xian and the eldest princess to sit down. Before the tea was served, Fong walked in from outside and said, "Marquis, Lord Sung is here. Sung Shichen should be here soon." Li nodded and said, "Invite him in." Sung Shichen was wearing casual clothes today. When he walked into the hall, he looked up and was stunned at first. Then he immediately bowed and said, "Sung Shichen greets the princess and the crown prince." Chapter 892. As though he hadn't expected the princess and the crown prince to be present, Sung Shichen lowered his head and drank his tea without saying a word. Li Xian glanced at him and raised his brows. "Sir, is there something you need?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Ignore Lord Sung for now. Speak your mind." Li Xian looked at him before looking at Sung Shichen. He seemed to understand something before he frowned and asked, "You actually asked me what I need? Don't you know why we're here?" Li Yi shook his head. "Why? Let me make this clear. If the Academy of Sciences runs out of funds, don't look for me. Look for Mingzu to borrow it. My family has high expenses. She can't even spend her money. Purge the emperor's side." Li Xian slapped the table and said, "That old man Chu has taken the lead to purge the emperor's side on behalf of Uncle Huang. He wants to get rid of the sycophants, but you're still sitting here drinking tea?" He said angrily, "Although old man Chu is respected and the Chu family has an extraordinary influence in the world of officials, making it nearly impossible to find any flaws, you can't just sit here and wait for death. It's not like I can't find any flaws." Sung Shichen put down his teacup, looked at Li Xian, and said, "Your Highness, you may not know this, but in the case of the missing woman case that was solved a few days ago, Grand Tutor Chu's grandson was captured on the spot at the Peng residence. It was only because someone exerted some influence that the case was left unsettled." Li Yi and Mingzu didn't look surprised. Instead, it was Li Xian who was taken aback. He stood up abruptly and asked, "Something like that happened?" Sung Shichen nodded. When he saw Li Yi and the princess's expressions, he knew that the Chui family had been too naive the previous time. Even if he didn't say anything, he wouldn't be able to hide it from them. Li Xian frowned as he paced around the hall. He muttered, "But this alone isn't enough to topple the Chu family. It won't be a good thing if we anger old man Chu. That old fellow even said something about scholarly bones. What bullsh asterisk t scholarly bones? What if we had a murder case?" Tseng Shichen stood up and said, "Unfortunately, the murder at the Miaoing Pavilion on the night of the Lantern Festival is also related to that young Master Zhu. That murder case had caused an uproar in the capital, but it had still not been solved." Li Xian also had some impression of it. He asked, "What do you mean? Didn't you say that the criminal originally wanted to harm the grandson of Grand Tutor Chu as well? You mean that the case was originally done by that person surnamed Chu?" Li Xian walked up to him and asked, "If that's the case, why hasn't there been any news at all?" "That's because the capital governor, Tseng Shichen, with the tacit approval of Grand Tutor Chu, concealed the truth of the case and framed a fugitive who was on the run. In addition, that woman's older sister felt that there was something fishy about the case and went to the capital governor's yamen to seek justice. To this day, she is still imprisoned in the yamen." Li Xian was startled. Confusion and shock appeared on his face. He pointed at him and said, Aren't you Tseng Shichen?" Tseng Shichen straightened his clothes and knelt down in the direction of the eldest princess. In a loud voice, he said, "I have sinned." "You?" Li Xian pointed at him and was so shocked that he couldn't say anything. In the end, he could only choke out, "You traitor, you betrayed me well. So that's why you locked that woman up." Li stood up as well. He looked at him and asked, "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Tseng Shichen raised his head and slowly said, "The time has not come." And Mingzu gazed at him and asked, "Do you know what the crime is?" Tseng Shichen lowered his head and said, "No matter what the crime is, it's still much better than following the Chui family down a dead end." And Mingzu looked at him and waved her hand. "Stand up and talk." After listening to Tseng Shichen's words, Her Highness shook her head and said, No wonder he was so radical. Grand Tutor Chu had no other way to protect the Chu family's reputation." Li Xian slammed the table and said angrily, "The Chui family actually used such despicable methods. Why didn't they tell old Chu about this?" Tseng Shichen shook his head and said, "The Chu family can no longer turn back. Whether it was the Chui family's scheme or not, the case was committed by Chu Ping. The Chui family has been uninvolved from the beginning. It's impossible to topple such a powerful family with just one side of the story. Moreover, the capital is deep. The Chui family is not as simple as the crown prince appears to be." Qin He. A trace of doubt appeared on Li Yi's face. His lips moved slightly before he looked at Tseng Shichen and asked, "How was the victim's sister now?" Tseng Shichen said, "In order to prevent the Chui family from silencing her, I have kept her in prison. But this time, if she is released, she can no longer sound the grievance drum of the capital yamen." "Young master, Liu Yizhong from the Ministry of Justice is here." Fang came in from outside, feeling puzzled. What was going on today? It wasn't a holiday, but everyone was running home. Tseng Shichen looked back and said, "I'll go back first. If anything happens, I'll get someone to contact you." Li Yi nodded and waved at Fang. He said, "Send Lord Tsing out through the back door." Lord Li. After Liu Yizhong entered, he first bowed to Li Yi. Just as he was about to speak, a voice rang in his ear. "Do you only have eyes for Lord Li?" Liu Yizhong was startled. When he saw the two people behind Li Yi, he immediately bowed and said, "Greetings, Your Highness, Crown Prince." When he looked up again, his mouth opened, but he didn't know if he should speak. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's fine." The princess and crown prince are on the same side. "Tell me, how's the investigation of the case?" Liu Yizhong nodded and said, "The two missing women have been confirmed to have nothing to do with the Peng family. In the process of investigating the case, I unexpectedly found that the number of missing women in the capital region in the past 2 years has far exceeded the previous years. But the places where they went missing before were relatively scattered, involving more than a dozen counties. The number of missing people in each county is not large, but if you add them up, it is an extremely terrifying number." Li Yi frowned slightly. There are so many people, but there's no clue at all? Lu Yizhong shook his head and said, all the clues were inexplicably cut off after extending to the capital. Until now, there has been no useful discovery, and there is no direct evidence that these are related to the Chui family. Li Xian looked at him in surprise and asked, you suspect that the Chui family is also involved in the business of abducting women and selling women? I don't know. Li Yi shook his head and said, whether or not it has anything to do with the Chui family, we should always try our best to find the two missing women. Otherwise, this case will not be over. He turned his head to look at Lu Yizhong and said, you continue to follow up on this case. Then this subordinate will go back first. Lu Yizhong nodded. After a few steps, a trace of hesitation appeared on his face. He then turned his head and said, my lord, you can deal with those rotten scholars with all your strength. There is no need to pay attention to the Chui family. Li Xian looked at Lu Yizhong's back as he left, then turned his head and said, why do I feel that there is a hidden meaning in his words? Li Yi looked at him in surprise. You can hear the hidden meaning in his words. Without waiting for Li Xian to reply, Fong walked in with a surprised expression. He looked at Li Yi and said, young master, someone has come again. Is the old man called Prime Minister Qin who came last time? Li Xian and Mingzhu looked at each other. The regent eldest princess was together with the country's traitor, which was rumored to be the talk of the outside world. It was not good for the prime minister to see it. Mingzhu looked at him and walked behind a screen with Li Xian. The white-haired old man stepped into the hall and said, young people are indeed fearless. The outside world is like a tide of rumors, yet you are still able to sit still. Li Yi stood up and cupped his hands. Prime Minister Qin, please sit. All right, I won't be sitting. I've only come here today to bring a message to you. Prime Minister Qin stood at the door and looked at him calmly. He said, stick to what you think is right. There are still many discerning people in the court. They will not watch everything you and Her Highness have done for these countries be destroyed in the hands of those with ulterior motives. Although I am old, with my old bones, I can still block them for you young people. He said one sentence, and only one sentence. After that, he turned around and left. It had to be said that Li Yi used to have some misunderstandings about the old man in front of him. However, some things that happened later changed his impression of Prime Minister Qin. Regardless of the Qin family, Prime Minister Qin was an old man who lived a pure life. He was an old man worthy of admiration. He watched Prime Minister Qin's figure disappear, and Fong's big face appeared in front of him again. Fong's face showed an extremely puzzled expression. Young master, what festival is it today? Li looked at him and asked, who is here? Old Lu of the county government. Chapter 893. County Magistrate Lu must have had a hard time these days. He must have been under a lot of pressure from all sides. Have a seat, Lord Lu. After he walked into the hall, Li stretched out his hand and turned to Fong. Go make a cup of tea for Lord Lu. County Magistrate Lu sat down uneasily. Seeing the tea cups on the table, he was slightly stunned. There were some guests just now. Mingzhu and Li Xian didn't come out from behind the screen, and Li Yi didn't explain too much. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, Lord Lu, I've troubled you these days. Lord Li, please don't say that. County Magistrate Lu hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands, saying, without Lord Li, there would be no me, Lu Dayo, today. I can still distinguish some things. Li Yi smiled and asked, Lord Lu, did you encounter some difficulties today? Could it be that someone from above is pressuring you? County Magistrate Lu smiled carelessly and said, I'm the magistrate of the capital city, the magistrate of His Majesty and the common people. Other people and other things have nothing to do with me. He looked at Li Yi and asked, I wonder if Lord Li still remembers this lowly official's friend? Li Yi was stunned. He thought for a moment and asked, Lord Lu, are you talking about the friend of the single-eyelid parents? Lu Dayo nodded and said, yes. Obviously, old Lu hadn't completely let go of this matter. Li Yi picked up the teacup and took a sip, indicating him to continue. He looked solemn and asked, "Lord Li, I'll ask you again, is it really impossible for parents with single eyelid to give birth to children with double eyelid?" Li shook his head and said, "I know it may be hard for Lord Lu to accept this matter, but this is indeed the law of nature, which has almost never changed since ancient times." County Magistrate Lu looked at Li Yi with hesitation on his face again. Finally, he made up his mind and said, "To be honest, the person I'm talking about is not my friend." He had used this trick countless times, but he never thought that the person was a friend of County Magistrate Lu. Li put down the teacup, sighed, and said, "In fact, I have known it for a long time." This time, it was County Magistrate Lu's turn to be shocked. He looked at Li Yi and asked in disbelief, "Lord Li, you also know that the King of Shu is not His Majesty's biological son?" He finally breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. If Lord Li had failed in the confrontation with the Chui family, his fate would not have been any better. Losing his official hat would have been a light punishment, and he might even have been killed. However, this matter was too important, and his life could be in danger at every turn. If it wasn't for his trust in Lord Li, unless it was a matter of life and death, he would definitely bury this secret in his heart forever. Unexpectedly, Lord Li had already known about this matter. "What did you say?" Li looked at him in a daze and asked, "Isn't your friend with single eyelids you?" County Magistrate Lu was surprised and said, "How can my friend be me? You mean His Majesty." Li reached out a hand and motioned him to stop talking. He rubbed the area between his eyebrows and tried to recall something in his mind. The old emperor had single eyelids, which was right. The King of Shu had double eyelids, which he also remembered very clearly. Imperial Concubine Shui, Imperial Concubine Shui. The key was Imperial Concubine Shui. He had only met Imperial Concubine Shui a few times, and most of the time was at night, so he really couldn't remember clearly. Clang. The screen on one side of the lobby fell to the ground, making a heavy sound. Seeing the two people coming out from behind the screen, County Magistrate Lu trembled and his legs suddenly became a little weak. Your Highness, Li Yi stood up and looked at Mingzhu, who was walking over, and asked, "Do you remember whether Imperial Concubine Shui has double eyelids or single eyelids?" Mingzhu's expression was a little absent-minded. After a moment, her eyes focused again. She looked at him and said slowly, "In the Jing Kingdom, double eyelids are considered beautiful. Imperial concubines are also required to have double eyelids." At that time, the Chui family was powerful in the imperial court. Only they could make an exception to send a woman with single eyelids into the palace and promote her to the position of imperial concubine. Li didn't quite understand those people who would cut their bodies for double eyelids. Single eyelids and double eyelids had their own beauty. He didn't expect that the imperial concubines with single eyelids would be discriminated against in the selection of imperial concubines. It really shouldn't be. However, the key point of the problem now was not the problem of discrimination at all. It was a big problem. How could it be? How could it be? Li Xian shook his head repeatedly. The imperial palace was so strict, and the imperial concubine was so noble. How could she do such a thing? Moreover, neither the Chui family nor imperial concubine Chui had any reason to do so. A hint of anger appeared on Li Xian's face as he said, "The Chui family has committed a heinous crime. They have committed such a heinous crime, yet they are still stirring up trouble in the imperial court. I must report this matter to Uncle Huang." "No, no." Li Yi and Mingzhu spoke almost at the same time. "You?" Li Xian stared at them with his eyes wide open. "Why?" This matter was related to the reputation of the imperial family. It was a crime punishable by extermination. Once it was investigated, not only the Chui family, but anyone who had anything to do with the Chui family would not be able to escape. Those people had forced the emperor to summon the king of Shu back to the capital. They had become traitors who wanted to steal the country. It was good enough that they could protect themselves. How could they still be in the mood to clean up the side of the emperor? And Mingzhu didn't bother to pay attention to him. Li glanced at him and asked, What do you think His Majesty will do if he hears such news in his current condition? Li Xian heard this and immediately fell silent. There was no doubt that if Uncle Emperor knew about this, the Chui family would definitely be destroyed. A large number of people in the capital would also die. But what about Uncle Emperor himself? The imperial physician had repeatedly warned that Uncle Emperor's body could no longer be stimulated. If he knew that the Chui family and imperial concubine Chui had done such a thing, the consequences would be unimaginable. We can't let Uncle Emperor know about this. Li Xian nodded and said, "What about you? If you let the Chui family go, how will you deal with those people?" Li shook his head and said, "You don't have to worry about this matter. I have my own way." Li Xian looked at County Magistrate Liu and suddenly said, "This matter is related to the reputation of the imperial family. Even if we have to investigate it, we can't make it public. The fewer people who know about it, the better." Li sighed and also looked at County Magistrate Liu. He murmured, "Only dead people can keep secrets." County Magistrate Liu's face was pale. He wanted to stand up, but he directly collapsed on the chair. When he walked out of the gate of the Li family, he still felt a little weak in his legs. He looked at the man beside him and said, "Brother Fong, help me a little." Fong held his arm and looked him up and down. He said with some disdain, "Old Liu, you should exercise more. Don't keep me guessing. What's your way?" In the hall, Mingzhu frowned and looked at him. She said, "Chu Ping is Chu Ping, and the Chu family is the Chu family. Even if we expose these two cases, we may not be able to shake the Chu family. Don't underestimate the Chu family's position in the hearts of the officials and people. Whether we can shake them or not depends on our skills." Li walked out of the door and said, "But before that, I want to see Wengu of the Jing Kingdom." Chapter 894. The capital of the Jing Kingdom was the most prosperous and affluent place in the Jing Kingdom. It was also the holy land in the hearts of scholars in the Jing Kingdom. There were many wealthy families and great scholars here. Countless scholars in the Jing Kingdom flocked to this place. Compared to the places outside the capital region, there were undoubtedly more opportunities here. In the private garden of a famous scholar in the capital, dozens of young scholars were scattered around the garden in groups of 3 to 5, chatting and laughing with each other. Somewhere a young man in green frowned and said, "No matter how I look at it, Lord Li doesn't look like a treacherous official. Think about it. He has done so much for our Jing Kingdom in the past few years. Even you and I have benefited a lot from him. How did he become a treacherous official? He has repeatedly tried to stop the king of Shu from entering the capital and obstructed His Majesty from assigning the position of the Eastern Palace. He must have some kind of wild ambition." The eyes of the person beside him flashed, and he shook his head. "You don't even trust the Grand Tutor and the great scholars?" Hearing this, the young scholar's face quickly showed hesitation. In other places in the garden, people's conversations were also limited to the matter of purging the emperor's side that had caused an uproar. The king of Shu is the legitimate crown prince. It is in line with the ancestral system and ethical principles. Although the eldest princess is as talented as a man, she is a woman after all. It is not a solution to go on like this. He thinks that he can interfere with the selection of the crown prince by relying on His Majesty's favor. If he isn't a treacherous official, what is? This kind of treacherous official usually doesn't have a good ending. In a pavilion in the garden, 2 old men were sitting opposite each other and playing chess. After the old man with the white piece put down a piece, he said, "Brother Chu has never cared about these court affairs. Why is he so radical this time?" Strange, strange. The old man with the black piece picked up a piece and thought for a moment before putting it down. He said, "Not to mention that Brother Chu is a little strange, the position of the Eastern Palace should not be left empty. It is the right way for the eldest prince to enter the Eastern Palace. How can the court affairs be controlled by a woman for so long?" "Pa." The old man holding the white chess piece suddenly put down the chess piece and said angrily, "Women taking over the government. Her Majesty's move is really stupid. The Women's Union, the Women's College, look at what she has done. What a mess." A few days ago, I visited an old friend. That old friend's granddaughter actually told me that the teachers of the women's college told them that it was impossible for parents with single eyelids to have children with double eyelids. That's utter nonsense. His Majesty and Imperial Consort Shui both have single eyelids. I've seen the King of Shu with my own eyes. He clearly has double eyelids. His tone was resentful. When I'm done with this part, I'll definitely submit a memorial to the women's college. Let's focus on the matter at hand first. However, the elder did not pay much attention to what he said. After placing down another black chess piece, he smiled and said, "Brother Zhao, you've lost. Although the Zheng family's mansion is big, it's not a good idea for you to live here all the time." Li looked at drunken Mo and asked, "Why don't you just move over? Whenever you miss this place, you can come back and stay for a few days." She shook her head and said, "I won't leave Sister watching behind." Li comforted her. "Who said you two should separate? When the time comes, Ruoqing will move over together, and you two can still live together. That's nothing. Even if you agree, Sister Ruoqing won't." She tilted her head and looked at Ruoqing. "Don't you think so, Sister Ruoqing?" Wan Ruoqing just smiled and did not answer. Li looked at her and said, "All right, but the old madam has been talking about you for a long time. Let's pick a time, and I'll take you to see her." "Ah, the old madam of the Li family?" Her expression immediately became a little flustered. Li nodded and said, "If you don't go, I'll have to bring the old madam to see you." This matter. She stood up, and the panic and nervousness on her face were even more obvious. She stammered, I haven't brushed my teeth today." Seeing her run into the room in a panic, Li could only shake his head. He understood her concerns, and it was not good to force her on such a matter. After she left, the smile on Ruoqing's face gradually faded. She looked at him with some worry and said, "I've heard the rumors outside. Mrs. Chen also asked me to bring you a message. Don't have a direct conflict with those people. Has the matter really reached such a serious point? Don't worry, it's just a small trouble. It'll be solved soon." Li stood up and looked at the closed door. He estimated that it would take a long time for drunken Mo to brush her teeth this time. After saying goodbye to Xiao Cui, he looked at Wan Ruoqing and said, "Let's go out for a walk." It was early May, and the weather was not very hot. Out of the Zing mansion, Wan Ruoqing comforted him. Drunken Mo should still be a little worried. "I've been persuading her these days. I think after a few days, she will agree to move over." Li tilted his head, looked at her, and asked, "What about you?" "Me?" Wan Ruoqing was stunned and said, "After all, I've lived here for a long time. I'm still used to Willow Lane. I'll probably move back there. The house is too big, and it's always a little lonely with only a few people living there. It won't be lonely if there are more people." When walking to the door of the brothel, Li smiled and said, "You go in first. I have something to do." "In a moment. Forget it. Let's talk about it later." Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked, "Will you come back in a moment?" "Depends." Li wanted to say that he would see how it went. Seeing her look at him, he swallowed the words that were in his throat and nodded. "Come here." On the street, the sloppy old man limped behind him, but his speed was not slow. He shook his head and said, "When you're young, you do what you think in your heart. It's better to regret now than to lament when you're old." Li looked at his legs and said, "You go to second uncle every day, but you can't beat him. Why bother? What do young people know?" The sloppy old man curled his lips disdainfully and said, "If I meet Taoist nun again now, I can let her use one hand." Li stopped before the guru finished bragging, because they had arrived at the Chu family. The gatekeeper of the Chu family was very polite. When he saw the young man and the old man, he asked them very politely if they had an invitation. We learned that they did not. He also politely told them that the grand tutor was meeting some old friends today and would not see any guests. If they did not have an invitation, they should come back another day. Li smiled and said, "Please inform them that I'm here to visit the grand tutor. If the grand tutor really doesn't want to see us, we can leave." The gatekeeper saw that the young man in front of him was extraordinary. Although the old man behind him was not very agile, his eyes were very scary. He could not figure out their identity and said, "Wait a minute, I'll go inform them." However, it's not certain whether the Grand Tutor will see you or not. Ning Chun. He murmured the name and quickly ran in. Somewhere in the capital, two figures walked out of a brothel. Hearing the gossip of the people around them, the middle-aged man turned his head and asked the man beside him, "Some people in the capital say that Sir Li is a pillar of the court, and some say that he is a traitor. What do you think?" "I don't know. I'm not very familiar with Sir Li." The man beside him shook his head, thought for a moment, and said, "However, I still think that Sir Li has been wronged." The middle-aged man looked at the crowd and murmured, "Since he has been wronged, why doesn't he respond to the rumors in the capital and the fights in the court?" Wu sighed and said, "Who knows? Don't worry." The middle-aged man patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Sir Li is a hero of his generation. These clowns won't last long in front of him. We have to believe in him." Chapter 895. The Chu Family. In the main hall, other than Grand Tutor Chu, there were several elders of similar ages. They all wore loose Confucian robes and had righteous expressions. Their bearing was extraordinary, and they seemed to have a noble character. A thin elder shook his head and said, "It's a pity. Although Grand Tutor Wang resigned long ago, and the Wang family has always kept a low profile, if he was willing to stand out, the matter would not have been dragged out to this day." Another elder with a serious expression sighed and said, "Grand Tutor Wang, I once personally went to invite him, but he tactfully refused. He said that he was old and did not care about the affairs of the court." His words revealed his admiration for that sycophant. Back then, when the envoy of the Qi kingdom caused havoc in the capital, no one in the vast capital dared to fight. Grand Tutor Wang dragged his sick body to court and was persuaded by everyone. You all know what happened next. It's no wonder he was so impressed. It's fine if Grand Tutor Wang doesn't help either side, but isn't this Qin when Brother Chu's disciple? This time, he actually joined forces with many important officials in the court to speak up for that sycophant. If not for that, why didn't the officials respond as soon as Brother Chu spoke? The matter has been dragged on for so long. It's not just the officials. I'm afraid that even the common people will have to put in more effort. As they drank tea and discussed, a servant of the Chu family walked in from outside. He walked to Grand Tutor Chu's side and whispered a few words. "Ning Chun?" Grand Tutor Chu frowned slightly. He had no impression of this person at all. When the gatekeeper saw this, he felt a wave of regret. He hurriedly said, "I'll send them away immediately." "Wait." He quickly walked out of the door, and a voice came from behind him. Grand Tutor Chu looked at him and asked, "You said that he's a young man about the same age as Ping and that he is handsome and has an extraordinary bearing?" The gatekeeper immediately nodded. "He is handsome and much more handsome than young master. Ning Chun sycophant," Grand Tutor Chu murmured. A hint of doubt appeared on his face as he said in a low voice, "Let him in." At the entrance of the Chu family, the gatekeeper ran over and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He respectfully said to Li Yi, "Young master, please come in." Compared to the other rich and powerful families that Li Yi had seen, the Chu residence wasn't very big. In fact, it could even be said to be on the small side. Perhaps it was also because the Chu clan didn't have many descendants, and the two generations of the clan only had one son. Too large of a residence couldn't be used, and it would seem deserted. Led by the servant, they did not pass through the main residence, but took a small path to the left. Not long after, they arrived at a small garden. A figure dressed in a gray Confucian robe stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but he felt that the body of this royal tutor was much hunchier than the last 2 times he saw him. The old man turned his head and asked calmly, "This old man has always been curious. When you saw me on the street that day, why did you hide?" At this moment, Li Yi realized that not only was his back hunched, but his complexion was also much older than before. It was as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. "I was afraid that you would blackmail me," Li Yi said honestly. "Unfortunately, I couldn't escape in the end." The two of them had been at loggerheads in the court that day, but when they met again, There was not the slightest atmosphere. The old man looked at him with a sharp gaze and asked, "You repeatedly prevented the eldest imperial son from entering the capital. Do you think that this old man has wronged you?" Li Yi smiled and said, "As for the reason, the royal tutor naturally understands." "Actually, I can understand the royal tutor." Li Yi gazed at the neatly trimmed flower garden to the side and slowly said, "The Chu clan has been a clean stream among the scholars of the Jing kingdom for many generations. They represent righteousness and righteousness. A mere sycophant naturally cannot compare to the Chu clan's century-old reputation." Royal tutor Chu's expression was calm, but his fists, which were hidden in his sleeves, were tightly clenched. His veins were bulging. "I know that Shui Qingming used some shameful methods to get hold of the Chu clan's weakness." He shook his head and continued, "Your grandson deserves it, but the Chu clan should not be implicated. Even if the Chui clan expose those scandals, it will not shake the Chu clan's foundation. Although it will inevitably damage the Chu clan's reputation, it will not be difficult to make up for it in the future." He gazed at Royal Tutor Chu again. "What is difficult is the Royal Tutor's choice." Royal Tutor Chu stared at him. A moment later, he unclenched his fists and said, "All of this is just your one-sided statement. There is no stain on the Chu clan, and there is no need to make up for it." Li met his gaze for a long time before sighing. He cupped his fists and said, "Since that's the case, Royal Tutor, this sycophant bids farewell." Just as he was about to walk out of the garden, he stopped and turned back to ask, "Was it worth it?" This time, he did not receive any response from the old man. When he walked out of the Chu household, the unkempt old man saw that his expression was relaxed. There was no hesitation or apprehension from before. He asked in surprise, "What? Did you succeed?" Li nodded, "It's done." The unkempt old man was somewhat disappointed along the way. He thought he could watch a great show, but from the looks of it, there wasn't much hope. When he arrived at the entrance of the brothel, he asked again, "How long will I be staying inside today?" "I'll go out for a walk." "I'm not going back today." He waved his hand. "You can walk as long as you want. Just let me know at home before nightfall." "You're not going back?" The unkempt old man looked at him in surprise and asked, "Are you sure?" He nodded and stepped into the brothel. Recently, there hadn't been many exciting shows at the brothel. The customers were already beginning to complain. It was time to add something new. He habitually glanced at the small building in front of him and happened to meet a gaze from the window of the loft. He was startled for a moment, then he smiled and waved his hand towards that direction, then walked over quickly. "He's not coming back tonight?" "The Li family." Mississippi Lu frowned. "Where is he?" The unkempt old man shrugged. "A place to watch a show." Mississippi Lu waved her sleeves. "Take me there." Rui grabbed her arm and shook her head. "My husband said before he went out this morning that he had something important to do today. He might not come back tonight." "What are you going to do?" "I'm not going to look for him." Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, I'm going to watch a show." In the room above the loft of the brothel, when Li Yi saw Ruoqing writing, she frowned slightly and seemed to be in pain. He asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" She put down the pen and looked at her fingers. She shook her head and said, "Maybe I've held the pen for too long these 2 days. There are blisters." Li Yi saw that there was a blister on her fingers. He frowned and said, "Forget it. Don't write anymore. When I finish writing this chapter, you can tell me how to arrange it, and I'll write it down." Li Yi put down the pen and said, "I'll help you pop the blister first. You can rest for a while." He took out a sterilized needle. These things were always available here. He held her hand and poked a hole in the blister. He squeezed out the liquid inside, but didn't completely pop it. He looked up and asked, "Does it hurt?" "No." Ruoqing smiled and shook her head. Li Yi nodded and said, "The wound needs to be disinfected. I'll apply some alcohol on it now. It might hurt a little. Just bear with it." Even though she was mentally prepared, when he applied the alcohol, she couldn't help but let out a suppressed cry of pain when she suddenly felt the stinging pain. "It hurts. Just bear with it." Mississippi Lu stood outside the door with a livid face. When she heard the woman's suppressed voice, she finally couldn't help but push the door open and enter. "Don't touch water these days, and don't write." He put down the things in his hands and looked at her to remind her. Then he turned to look at Mississippi Lou and asked in surprise, "Rui, why are you here?" Mississippi Lou glanced around the room and then looked at Lee. She said lightly, "I'm here to ask you to go home for dinner." Chapter 896. Women were really strange. She said that she wanted to invite him back for a meal, but she left by herself. It was likely that the sloppy elder's girlish heart had run wild, and he had forgotten to bring a message back. Time was tight to begin with, so there was no need to waste any more time. Lee held a cold steamed bun in his mouth and wrote as he ate. He turned to Juan Ruaching and said, "If you haven't eaten, go out and eat something first. I still need a while to finish." Juan Ruaching nodded and went out. When she came back again, she was holding a food box in her hand. She looked at Lee and shook her head. "You can't just eat steamed buns. I bought some porridge. Have some." Lee nodded and said, "Leave it there first. I'll eat it later." He wasn't too hungry. Of course, the most important thing was to hurry up. After leaving the Chu family today, there was no turning back. There was no need to hold back against an enemy. After writing a few words, a gentle voice sounded in his ear. "Open your mouth." Lee paused and looked back at her. This scene was so familiar. He subconsciously opened his mouth, and she gently placed the spoon in. An interesting play not only needed a brilliant script, but the stage layout, the actors' acting skills, as well as their expressions and lines were all very important. All he could do was the first step. The rest of the more detailed and tedious matters had to be left to professionals like her. After he wrote the first chapter, he discussed these matters with her for more than 2 hours. They discussed from day to night. Lee saw the fatigue between her brows and said, "I'll write the next chapter. Rest for a while." Juan Ruaching nodded and didn't refuse. She had been busy until late last night, so she was actually a little sleepy. She still had to discuss the second chapter later, so it was beneficial to take a short rest now. She leaned over the small table by the bed and looked at the flickering candlelight before slowly closing her eyes. "Ha!" The oil lamp gave off a spark and let out a soft sound. When she slowly opened her eyes, she found that she was lying on the bed, covered with a thin layer of quilt. She got up from the bed and looked in a certain direction subconsciously. There was no one at the table. Has he gone back? The paper spread out on the table should be the finished script. She picked it up and looked at it. It was indeed finished. It was dark outside the window. It was already very late. After tomorrow, she would be busy again, and even busier than before. In order to ensure enough energy, she had to rest early even though she wasn't sleepy. She took off her coat and only wore a doo-doo. She put it on the cabinet and sat on the bed. Just as she was about to take off her shoes and socks, the door was pushed open from the outside. Usually, only she and Yu Zhu lived in this small building, so the door didn't need to be locked from the inside. She subconsciously thought that it was Xiao Zhu who came in, but when she looked up, her expression froze. "You're awake. I was afraid that you would be hungry at night, so I cooked a bowl of noodles for you." Lee walked in with a tray and closed the door with his foot. When he heard her explanation, he was also stunned. After a long time, he asked tentatively, "Why don't you put on your clothes first?" I thought you had left." Juan Ruaching put on her clothes, her cheeks still red. "Well, it ended a little earlier than expected. I'll leave right away." He put down the tray and couldn't help but turn his head to look at her. It was really strange. The new style of underwear had become completely popular in the capital, but whether it was Mississippi Lou, Zue, Mo, or Ruaching, they all had a special fondness for doo-doo. It really didn't make sense, this. "Did you cook it?" Juan Ruaching looked at the fragrant noodles on the table. In addition to a few green decorations on top of the noodles, there was also a poached egg. She turned to look at him and asked, "There is no kitchen here. I went outside deliberately." Lee looked at her, shook his head, and said, "Although it's not good to eat so late, it's my birthday after all. I still have to eat longevity noodles." Juan Ruaching looked at him and said in a daze, "Birthday?" Lee asked helplessly, "Your birthday is only half a month later than Zue Mo's. Don't tell me you've forgotten it yourself?" Her face was a little red. She sat at the table and ate the noodles. Lee walked over and opened the window. In the distant night sky, the first light bloomed. Then there were 2, 10, 100, and countless. One watching held her chopsticks and looked out of the window absent-mindedly. The fireworks illuminated half of the sky. On the street, not far from the window, there were countless exclamations. From her direction, he stood at the place where the fireworks were the most brilliant, smiling and waving at her. He didn't stay out all night. If he really had a long talk with Ruaching all night, it was very likely that Mississippi Lou would come over in the middle of the night to ask him to go back for dinner. What's more, in the next few days, Ruaching would be very busy and needed enough time to rest. At the very least, it was not good for a man and a woman to be alone in a room. If it was spread out, it would ruin the girl's reputation. If she couldn't get married in the future, it would be great. Even so, when he returned home, it was after midnight. There was no light in the whole house. Rui and the child should have fallen asleep long ago. He groped his way to the study, but he didn't turn on the light. He walked to the bed, lay down, and slept in his clothes. When he stretched out his hand to pull the quilt, his palm touched a very soft place. He subconsciously squeezed it, and a cold voice seemed to ring in his ear. "Take your hand away." It didn't seem like it, but it was. He turned over and got out of bed. Looking at Mississippi Lou, who sat up on the bed, he said in surprise, "Why are you sleeping here?" When he asked this question, he realized that he had asked a nonsense question. Recently, Mississippi Lou had abandoned martial arts for literature. She studied hard every day and even occupied his study. Most of the time, she read until late at night. It was not a difficult thing to understand that she slept here at night. A tiger's butt should not be touched, let alone a tigress' butt. Li hid the hand behind his back and took a few steps back, always alert for sword light beside the bed. When he retreated to the door, he saw that there was no movement beside the bed. He thought for a while and asked again, "If I go to sleep now, I will definitely disturb the child. The guest room is not cleaned. If you sleep here, where should I sleep? Your room?" Finally, there was some movement beside the bed. Mississippi Lou got out of bed. Although Li could feel 2 eyes in the dark, which made him feel guilty, Mississippi Lou didn't mention what had happened just now. She walked straight past him and left the study. He closed the door and went back to the bed to lie down. A familiar light fragrance lingered in his nose. After being stunned for a while, he murmured, "Is there a difference?" Since the capital entered summer, the weather became hot and dry, and the situation was also restless. In the court, the 2 forces led by Grand Tutor Chu and Prime Minister Qin had new changes every day. The common people were also affected a lot. Rumors and rumors were everywhere. However, County Marquis Li, who was at the heart of the struggle, was as still as a mountain from beginning to end. He didn't make any response or reaction to it, which made everyone puzzled. Of course, although this matter affected the hearts of the common people, the affairs of the court and the debate between loyalty and treachery were too far away from them. It was not an easy choice to believe in the famous Grand Tutor Chu or Lord Li, who had done a lot of good things for the common people. Compared with this matter, the new play that had been promoted in the brothel since a few days ago was obviously much closer to them. That new play had a trial screening in only one brothel in the capital today. Even if the brothel was already full of people, the guests who didn't buy tickets in advance could only stand outside the door and sigh. The spectators who were lucky enough to buy tickets were naturally complacent. In the dark theater, only the lights around the stage were on. They didn't wait long. The stage curtain was opened, and a faintly discernible voice floated into their ears. "Flowers will bloom again, but people will never be young again. There is no need to be rich and powerful. Peace and happiness are immortals." The curtain was completely opened, and an old woman in cotton clothes with a bent body appeared on the stage. The old woman took a few steps forward and introduced, "I'm Granny Kai from Chuzhou City. We're the family of 3. Unfortunately, my husband has passed away, and he only has 1 child who is 8 years older than me. I have 2 children, and my family is quite rich. Here is Scholar Doe." The ordinary opening was the original routine of a common play, But because of the overwhelming promotion in the brothel at this moment, people were still looking forward to the play. Chapter 897. At the beginning of the play, there was a cliffhanger. Do Tianzhong, a Xiaocai in Chuzhou City, owed Granny Kai 40 taels of silver, so he had to sell his 7-year-old daughter, Do Yi, to Granny Kai as a child bride. Do Tianzhong received 10 taels of silver from Granny Kai for traveling expenses and then went to the capital city to take the exam. There were not many highlights in this cliffhanger, but the actors on the stage were excellent, and the plot was smooth. It was quite enjoyable to watch, so the audience was not disappointed. That little Duanyin is quite good at acting at such a young age. You don't know. They have been trained in this field since they were young. Since they can go on the stage, you can't find any fault with them. That's true. But since this play is called Do Yi's Injustice, I don't know what the injustice is. What's the hurry? It's just the beginning. Let's keep watching. Because of the popularity of the Justice Bao series, people were very fond of this kind of drama. Who wouldn't like to redress the grievances of the people? Soon, they found out why Do Yi had been wronged. The Kai family moved, Do Yi's husband died early, and she and her mother-in-law depended on each other. Then, they were framed by evil people and happened to meet a corrupt official. Do Yi had no choice but to confess and admit the crime in order to save her mother-in-law from being tortured. She was sentenced to death and sent to the execution ground, according to the usual practice of the play. This was the most exciting part of the play. This corrupt official deserves to die. This daughter-in-law is so filial. She is willing to bear the injustice in order to save her mother-in-law. Where's Lord Bao? Why isn't he here? Quickly reverse the verdict for Do Yi. Have you ever seen a play before? How could Lord Bao show up at this time? It was Garjon who descended from the sky and shouted, "Spare her life." Finally, someone couldn't help but remind them. Brothers, are you two acting? Really? Isn't that Justice Bao? Back to the stage. Do Yi had been sent to the execution ground. Two voices rang in the audience's ears like a huge bell. Breaking the law for no reason, not being on guard against being punished by the Constitution, the cry was earth-shattering. In an instant, wandering souls went to the Sunluo Temple. How could they not blame the heaven and earth? Good people suffer poverty and have a shorter life, while evil people enjoy wealth and have a longer life. Heaven and earth. He acted as if he was afraid of the strong and bullied the weak, but it turned out that this was also how he pushed the boat with the current. You're the earth, yet you can't tell good from bad. Heaven, you are wrong to judge the virtuous and foolish to be heaven. As soon as these two sentences were spoken, everyone's hearts immediately sank. They seemed to feel that the injustice Do Yi had suffered had reached the point where even heaven and earth resented her. At this time, the executioner said, "Death is at hand. What else do you have to say?" Do Yi said, "I want a clean banquet. When I, Do Yi, stand up, I want Zhang 2 white ropes to hang on the spear. If I, Do Yi, am really wronged, my head will fall wherever the knife passes. My hot blood will not stain the ground. It will all fly to the white silk. Now is the hottest time of the year. If Do Yi is really wronged, after she dies, 3 feet of auspicious snow will fall from the sky and cover her corpse. Do Yi died a wrong death. From now on, Chuzhou City will suffer from drought for 3 years." Do Yi's voice was sorrowful as she made 3 wishes in a row. Blood stains the white silk, blood splatters in June, 3 years of drought. The crowd was silent, and no one was talking anymore. The executioner shouted angrily, "The time has come. Execute her." In the middle of the stage, the executioner swung the knife down, and Do Yi fell to the ground. Her blood sprayed into the air and splashed on the white silk. At this moment, more than half of the people in the audience couldn't help but stand up. Bloodstains on the white silk. It was indeed bloodstains on the white silk. Do Yi's first wish had come true. On the stage, the executioner quietly made a hand gesture, and a board rose up from where a piece of the stage was missing, and the stage became seamless again. Right at this moment, someone below suddenly shivered and murmured, Why do I feel that the surroundings are chilly? Someone couldn't help but wrap his arms around himself. Although the weather was hot, there were ice mirrors everywhere. Even if it wasn't hot, it wouldn't be cold. Someone suddenly felt a chill in his nose, and he couldn't help but touch his nose, only to find that it was wet. When he raised his head, he discovered that there were actually white snowflakes falling from the sky. Is it snowing? How is that possible? It's summer now, and we are in a brothel. Above everyone's heads, on the thick beam, someone was standing there, gently shaking the bamboo basket in his hand. An extremely fine ice shard were scattered down from above. When everyone looked back to the stage, Do-E's body had already been buried under the snow. As the tragic music became clearer, the lines of the opera surfaced in everyone's mind. I don't want half a star of blood spilled in the mortal world. It's all in the air. If I have a heart full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers roll like a brocade, so that my body won't be revealed. Do-E died an unjust death. From now on, Chuzhou City will suffer a drought for 3 years. This time, there was no bodyguard Jean, no justice Bao, and Do-E was executed. The vows she made before her death were fulfilled one by one. Blood splashed on the white silk, and snow fell in June. According to common sense, this was impossible. Even heaven and earth were touched by her grievances, and her wish was fulfilled. 3 years later, Do-E's father, Do Tianzhong, would reverse the verdict for her and clear her name. However, at this moment, the atmosphere in the brothel was getting out of control. On the stage, the performers who were about to start their performance had no choice but to stop. Below the stage, many people stared at the stage in a daze, and many had tears streaming down their cheeks. Do-E was unfortunate, and she was miserable. However, only a few of those who could sit and watch the show were from rich families. Their status was not much higher than Do-E's, and they were also bullied by all kinds of evil forces. This was Do-E's injustice, and it was also their injustice. The show could no longer go on, so the manager of the brothel announced that the last twist of Do-E's injustice would be postponed. When the audience walked out of the brothel, they felt that the scorching sun was not as hot as it used to be. Instead, they felt a chill down their spines. They were sweating, but it was cold sweat. What's wrong with you guys? Is the show over? Was it good? What's going on? Say something. The audience couldn't get any useful information from the people who had already walked out of the brothel. By then, the second show was about to begin, so they didn't have time to ask the audience questions. After a long time, the second group of people walked out of the brothel. An unjust case shocked the world, and snow fell in June. In just a few days, the play known as the greatest injustice of all time had spread across the capital. All the other shows in the dozens of brothels in the capital had temporarily stopped, and only Do-E's injustice was being rehearsed in every brothel. In the county government of the capital, County Magistrate Liu looked at the thick stack of papers in front of him and suddenly felt dizzy. He slumped in his chair and murmured, "How can there be so many unjust cases in the capital?" Right under the feet of the emperor, below, Arrestor Zhao showed a wry smile and said, "Lord Liu, don't complain. These days, it's the same everywhere in the county government. Chuzhou is our neighbor. The governor of Chuzhou and the magistrate of Shanyang County have been scolded badly. The people of the capital are filled with righteous indignation. Some people are even kneeling at the gate of the palace, begging the princess to investigate the case thoroughly and prove Do-E's innocence. This is just a play." County Magistrate Liu slammed the table angrily and said loudly, "But there are so many unjust cases. How can I investigate? Sir, this is really nothing. Think about it this way. In the play, if it wasn't the magistrate of Shanyang County, but the magistrate of the capital, shut up." County Magistrate Liu's face turned pale, and his whole body quivered. He suddenly bounced up from the chair and shouted, "Beat the drum. Raise the court. I'm going to break 10 today." On the street in the capital, a man looked at the woman next to him and said pitifully, "My wife, believe me, I really lost my purse. I didn't keep a vixen outside." The woman said angrily with a face full of disbelief, "How dare you deny it? You have the smell of her perfume on you. Do you think I can't smell it? The man helplessly took out a bottle of perfume from his pocket and said, "This is the birthday gift I bought for you with the money I saved for a year," he said with a sad face. "How dare you suspect me of keeping a vixen outside? I'm more innocent than Doe. What? You have a secret stash of money?" At the corner of the street, a woman chased after an 8 or 9-year-old child and said angrily, "If you didn't go to school today, did you go to the brothel?" The child stopped and shook his head. "I didn't." "You are wrongly accusing me." The woman grabbed his arm. "How dare you lie to me? The teacher in school told me everything." "I really didn't." The child shook his head violently and said loudly, "Mother, you are wrongly accusing me. If I die of being wrongly accused, I will make my blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years in the capital." "You are still denying it." The woman took off his pants on the street and slapped him a few times, saying as she slapped him, "I will make your blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years. Recently, there was a wind of crying injustice in the capital. Everyone, regardless of gender or age, called themselves Doe. When the brothel performed for free, there were even no pedestrians on the usually crowded streets. In addition, the government offices in each county were blocked by the people who appealed every day. The situation did not improve until the government suppressed several groups of troublemakers with a tough attitude. At this time, in front of the government office of the Ministry of Justice, a weak woman walked out of the crowd. After beating the big drum at the entrance of the government office, she knelt in front of the door and cried out in a sad voice, "Sir, I am wrongly accused." Chapter 898. "Sir, I've been wronged." The woman knelt in front of the Ministry of Justice. Her voice was extremely sorrowful, as if she had a great grievance in her heart that she had nowhere to cry about. It drew the sidelong glances of passers-by. Recently, the common people had been filing complaints. It wasn't just the yamen of the various counties, but also the yamen of the capital, the imperial censorate, the Ministry of Justice, and even the Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Rights, and Ministry of Works. As long as it was a yamen, it was unavoidable. After all, the number of yamens was limited, and there were many people. It was impossible for them all to gather together. Even if all the yamens in Jingdo were taken into account, there wouldn't be enough. This kind of situation had greatly hindered the normal operation of the yamen. Thus, the eldest princess quickly made an order based on the feelings of the people and the actual situation in Jingdo. Anyone who took the opportunity to purposely cause trouble and block the yamen would be severely punished as a warning to others. If there were truly any grievances, they should be filed in an orderly manner. The relevant yamen would deal with them one by one according to the urgency and severity of the case. Any grievances had to be tried, and any cases had to be reversed. The bottom line of the law was strictly observed, and the people were given a clear sky. With the eldest princess order, the vigorous anti-corruption cases among the people were temporarily eased. It didn't disappear. Instead, it went from disorder to order. Countless eyes were fixed on the various yamens in Jingdo. At this critical juncture, even the usually unbridled playboys in Jingdo were tightly restrained by their families. They were terrified that they would cause trouble and become targets in everyone's eyes. Even a small matter would be infinitely magnified to a point where their families couldn't bear it. The Ministry of Justice usually dealt with serious cases, unless the emperor designated it. The main hall of the Ministry of Justice was usually closed, and complaints of grievances were not allowed in front of the Ministry of Justice. However, this time was different. Each county yamen was about to go crazy, and the Ministry of Justice couldn't be idle either. A bailiff had already come out from inside and kindly helped the woman up from the ground. He kindly asked her what grievances she had suffered and if she had a piece of paper. If she didn't, she could have a bailiff from the Ministry of Justice write one for free. From beginning to end, there wasn't much impatience on their faces. So many people were watching on the street. If one place wasn't handled well, the Ministry of Justice's reputation would be ruined. This was a special time. If something went wrong at this time, It would be strange if the minister didn't skin them alive. Soon, the woman was helped into the hall by a Ministry of Justice runner. Among the onlookers on the street, someone shook his head and said, "In terms of how they treat the common people, the officials of the Ministry of Justice are still the best. Unlike the governor's mansion. I heard that some time ago, someone went to the Yamen to seek justice, but the people of the Yamen didn't care. They even locked the person up for disturbing the Yamen. Compared to the Ministry of Justice, the difference is obvious." That's right. As soon as he finished speaking, someone else chimed in. "Unfortunately, I was also present at that time. It is said that the young lady's younger sister died. This is a murder case. The people at the capital's magistrate's office are really too careless. I heard that the young lady has been arrested several times." "What is the capital magistrate worried about?" Another person interrupted. "The one who went in just now seems to be the young lady. Why is she in the Ministry of Justice this time? There's such a thing." Someone's face was filled with anger as he quickly walked towards the entrance of the Ministry of Justice. "If that's the case, I might have to take a look at this case." "I'm going to. Let's go together." At the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, the excited crowd was stopped by the Yamen officials. However, they didn't stop them for long. After verifying their identities, someone specially led them in. Based on the principle of fairness and openness, when the Ministry of Justice was conducting a case, the common people were allowed to listen in. The Ministry of Justice claimed that there were laws to abide by, that the law was enforced strictly, and that those who violated the law would be punished. For some cases, the process of handling the case was completely transparent, which won many people's hearts. Of course, in order not to disturb the order of the case, the number of people listening in was still limited to 50. However, although most people couldn't see it with their own eyes, the various details of the case would be passed on through the mouths of these 50 people. In a short period of time, the news would spread throughout the entire capital. In the court, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, patted the gavel and asked, "Who are you? Where do you live? What are your grievances? Tell me slowly." The woman stood in the court and said softly, "Your Excellency, my name is Lin Qin. I live near the city gate of the capital. My younger sister is 16 years old. Her maiden name is Lin Shuang. She used to be a musician at the Miaoying Pavilion. On the night of the 15th of the first month, today's court will be held by Lu Qingtian. This lady is really lucky this time. Every case handled by Lu Qingtian has been solved by him." "Not necessarily. It's very likely that the capital governor's residence will be involved in this case. However, I still believe in Lu Qingtian. In the past few years, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, had handled countless cases. No matter how well hidden the criminal was, there was no place for him to hide. This was because he often helped the people and solved ordinary cases. He was deeply loved and respected by the people of the capital. People gave him the nickname of Lu Qingtian. Lu Qingtian had the meaning of the Great Lord of Justice. It also overlapped with the fictional image of Justice Bao in the opera. This was the highest praise the people of the capital had for him. Inside the court, when a woman was complaining about her grievances, people outside the court had already understood. So this woman is Miss Shuang's sister. Miss Shuang's zither skills were unparalleled. It's a pity that she died young. That 100 birds pay homage to the phoenix will never be heard again. What a pity. What a pity. Didn't the capital governor's office say that it was the work of a criminal from the imperial court? Bullshit capital governor's office. One of the people who had been paying attention to the situation inside the court was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He angrily said, "Listen, this lady only wanted to see Miss Shuang's body, but the capital governor's office found a reason to arrest her. Later on, they used a few more reasons to lock her up in prison for almost half a year. If there's nothing fishy going on, I won't believe it even if I beat you to death." At this time, as the woman in the court explained, the case gradually became clear. According to the explanation given by the capital governor's office, on the night of the Upper Yuan dynasty, a criminal from the imperial court hid in the Fine Sound Pavilion. After using extremely cruel methods to kill Miss Shuang, He tried to harm the young master of the Chu family, but failed. Then he jumped out of the window and escaped. Even now, although the wanted poster had been posted everywhere, the criminal had not been arrested. If it weren't for the lady standing in the court, perhaps the case would have passed with the passage of time and be forgotten by people. However, her experience and the actions of the capital governor's office added many points of doubt to the case. How did Miss Shuang die? How did the criminal escape the heavy pursuit of the government without leaving a single trace? What role did the capital governor's office play in this case? The entire case suddenly became complicated and confusing. Everyone said that Doe was wronged. This lady's younger sister had died a dubious death. She went to the government to seek redress and was imprisoned for half a year. She had no place to seek redress for her grievances, so how could she not be wronged? Once the case broke out, it quickly attracted the attention of the people of the capital. It also made the Ministry of Justice pay great attention to it. The relevant witnesses of the Fine Sound Pavilion had already been brought to the Ministry of Justice and were heavily protected. The Ministry of Justice had also sent in a request to pull out all the files related to the case from the capital governor's office and reinvestigate the case. They wanted to prove the innocence of the deceased and give the people who were paying attention to the case an explanation. Under these circumstances, Doe's injustice continued to be performed in various brothels in the capital. Every day, countless benefit performances were held. In a certain brothel, Fong looked at Li Yi and said with some heartache, "Young master, this stage, this scene, this effect, so much ice and only so little ticket money, and so many benefit performances. This time, we've suffered a great loss." Li Yi shook his head and looked at him. With sincere and heartfelt words, he said, "Don't always think about money. You also have to think about contributing to society." Chapter 899. People should look forward to the future, but they couldn't always focus on money. Fong had never been an educated man, so it was normal that he couldn't keep up with the times. Therefore, it was necessary to help him establish a correct outlook on life and values. For example, money could never be used up. When the time was right, he should give back to the society by helping the people perform for free so that they could enjoy a 5D movie experience. Although he would lose money, he would be giving back to the society, which would help him realize his self-worth. Looking at his confused face, Chun Fan knew that he didn't understand. But this was not a big deal. The current old Fong state of mind was much higher than before. He did good deeds without leaving his name, risked his life, and used his private money to support a single girl for 3 years without asking for anything in return. Even in this era where people's hearts were not so fickle, it was still very rare. This world doesn't give the poor a chance to live. Earth, you don't know what's good for you. Heaven, you don't know what's good for you. I don't want to shed even half a star of blood in the mortal world. If I have a stomach full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers rolling like a brocade so that my body won't be exposed. From now on, the Chuzhou city will suffer from 3 years of drought. Inside the brothel, someone would stand up and shout from time to time. This was a typical example of someone who was too engrossed in the scene and placed himself in it. There was no need for the staff of the brothel to remind them at all. Someone beside them would press them down so that they wouldn't spoil everyone's interest. In another brothel, in a remote corner, the man handed a handkerchief to the middle-aged man next to him and sighed. Ward 5, wipe your tears. The middle-aged man wiped his tears and heaved a sigh. Well done. It's a good performance. The burly man nodded. If he didn't know that this was a play, he would have rushed up and punched that dog official to death with 3 punches when blood was splashed on the white rope and snow was flying in the 6th month of June. The middle-aged man stared at the stage and murmured, "Doe's grievances could be redressed, but I wonder how many more people's grievances are still buried in the darkness." The burly man shook his head and said, "The imperial court is already vigorously investigating the unjust and false cases. Those filthy and ugly fellows hiding in the dark will one day be dragged out and exposed to the sun." The middle-aged man nodded. "Yes, The sun is about to rise. How could it be? How could she sue the Ministry of Justice? Chui Qingming's face was filled with rage. The teacup in his hand fell to the ground, and the tea splashed everywhere. He gasped for breath and loudly said, "Last time, we have already lost an assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Now, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yiji, is only following that person's orders. That woman is still in prison. How could such a thing happen? She caused trouble twice a few days ago and has already attracted the attention of some people. Without a reason, we can't keep her in prison forever." Tseng Shichen shook his head and said, "I thought she would be more obedient after being locked up for so long. Who would have thought that as soon as she went out, the people following her were not paying attention and made her kneel in front of the Ministry of Justice?" Chui Qingming returned to his seat and calmed down for a while. Then he said in a deep voice, "I will take care of this case. Otherwise, if it really gets investigated, not to mention Chu Ping, even you, the capital governor, will not be able to protect yourself." As soon as he finished speaking, a runner came in to report that the Ministry of Justice had arrived. Chui Qingming suddenly stood up from his seat, his face full of shock. How could it be so fast? The case of Miss Shuang of the Wonderful Sound Pavilion quickly had new developments. The case file of the capital governor's office that had accepted the case was full of loopholes and could not withstand scrutiny. The coroner who had examined the corpse also revealed the truth under the interrogation of the Ministry of Justice. That night, Miss Shuang was not killed by the criminal. Instead, she was tortured and humiliated to death. As for why the murderer was said to be the criminal who might not have appeared, they would have to ask the young master of the Chu family, who was in the same room as Miss Shuang. The Chui family. A middle-aged man slammed the table and said angrily, "How could there be such a big oversight? Does Tseng Shichen not have a brain? Doesn't he know what time it is?" Then a suspicious expression appeared on his face, and he muttered, "Could it be Tseng Shichen? What good does this do for him?" Chui Qingming shook his head and said, "This case has attracted the attention of the court and the people. If it is found out, not only will he lose his position as the capital governor, but he will also lose his official position." The middle-aged man revealed a defeated expression. "That Lu Yi is a ruthless character. It is said that there is no case that he cannot solve. This time, I'm afraid that the Chu family, one Chu family, one capital governor." Chui Qingming clenched his fists and asked through gritted teeth, "What's the situation with the Chu family?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice has not summoned Chu Ping for the time being, but it should be soon. In that place, no matter how tight-lipped one is, it is inevitable." What about that matter? The people no longer trust the Chu family. Even those great scholars do not dare to risk universal condemnation and speak casually. After all, this case has too many implications, and the situation is not optimistic. Chui Qingming thought for a long time and loosened his fists. He slowly said, "The Chu family can't be saved, but the capital governor may not." The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Will we also be dragged into this matter?" Chui Qingming shook his head and said, "Tseng Shichen is a smart man. He knows what to do." The Ministry of Justice investigated cases very quickly, and this case was extremely fast. They had no choice but to act quickly. The entire capital was watching the progress of the case, so they did not dare to delay. And this case was actually not complicated. There was no need to summon the grandson of the Grand Tutor. The several bailiffs of the capital government who knew about the case confessed everything not long after they were brought to the Ministry of Justice. They had indeed been pursuing a criminal that day, but the criminal had not been in the Fine Sound Pavilion. They had accidentally stumbled upon young Master Chu's deed, only to discover to their shock that young Master Chu, who liked to play tricks, had accidentally strangled the young lady to death. What happened next was logical. The Chu family was a famous noble family in the capital. How could they tolerate such a stain on a member of their family? Naturally, they used the power of the family to cover up this matter. Thus, The cause of Lady Shuang's death became a crime committed by a fugitive. The young master of the Chu family, who was originally the murderer, suddenly became the victim. In order to cover up the truth, they quickly disposed of Lady Shuang's body. When Lady Shuang's sister went to the Yamen to complain, they were afraid that the matter would be exposed, so they also arrested her and threw her into prison. Adding insult to injury, this was simply insane. The injustice of Do was just a play and could not be taken seriously, but Lady Shuang's grievance had really happened right beside them. They had heard it with their own ears, seen it with their own eyes, and had always been paying attention. And during the course of the trial, the bailiffs of the capital government revealed another secret that further solidified Chu Ping's crime. Not long ago, the disappearance of a girl that had caused an uproar actually also had the shadow of this young master of the Chu family. However, this matter was still concealed by the all-powerful Chu family. It was precisely because of this young master of the Chu family's perverted hobby that Lady Shuang had died a wrongful death. Lady Shuang must have been forced by that beast. No wonder it snowed on the night of the Lantern Festival. I originally thought that it was a strange phenomenon that happened once every few decades, but it turns out that the heavens were crying out for Lady Shuang's injustice. To think that I had always thought that the Chu family was the backbone of our Jing kingdom, that Grand Tutor Chu was a just and righteous person, but who would have thought, he still has the cheek to say that Lord Li is a sycophant? What has Lord Li done? He has made great contributions to the country and the people, but he is not the least bit proud of it. He has even repeatedly resigned from his position and refused to be rewarded. And what about him? He covered up for his descendant, causing such a huge injustice. How can he still be called a scholar? He even wants to frame Lord Li, the pillar of our Jing kingdom. If not for Prime Minister Qin and the other officials in the imperial court, I'm afraid. Sycophant. This is a true sycophant. Old and undying, a great traitor to the country. In the court, Lu Qingtian slammed the gavel. Summoned Chu Ping. A few bailiffs quickly walked out of the main gate and headed towards the Chu family. At first, there were only a few people following behind them. Soon, it became 10, then 100. After passing through an alley, the crowd behind them could no longer be seen. Chapter 900. The Chu family. Is this real or not? Grand Tutor, what should we do? The public's discontent is already boiling outside. They're coming here. Several elders paced back and forth in the hall with anxious expressions on their faces. Because of the Fine Sound Pavilion murder case, the Chu family had already been pushed to the heart of the struggle. As the case progressed, although most of the officials could still maintain their calm due to the prestige of the Grand Tutor, the common people of the capital had already lost trust in the Chu family and the elders. Yesterday, a rather famous scholar had been smashed in the head with a rock for merely saying a sycophant harming the country against County Marquis Li. His body was covered in rotten leaves, and he was in an extremely sorry state. When he returned home, even the walls of the courtyard had been pushed down. The cause of all this was the Chu family. The Chu family had won the hearts of the people, but they had also lost the hearts of the people. The old man before them was just an ordinary old man. Grand Tutor Chu sat in a chair with a calm expression. It was impossible to tell what was on his face. He only stared blankly at the door as if in thought, but his eyes were empty. A servant of the Chu family ran in a panic and shouted, "The Ministry of Justice is here." Several constables walked in and slowly bowed to the old man in the chair. The one in the lead said, "Lord Grand Tutor, we suspect that your grandson is related to a serious case. Please come with us, young Master Chu." A middle-aged man rushed out from the side and shouted, "You think you can take Ping away just because you suspect him?" The constable took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over. He bowed and said, "Lord Chu, this is a warrant from the Ministry of Justice. Please take a look." The middle-aged man didn't even look at the warrant. He said coldly, "How can a member of the Chu family be taken away so easily by the Ministry of Justice? Without His Majesty's imperial edict, I'd like to see who dares to act recklessly in the Chu family. The constable's face showed some difficulty when he heard this. This was the Chu family. The Chu family was different from other family clans. With Grand Tutor Chu present, even the members of the Ministry of Justice could not act too brazenly. Of course, if the Chu family was reasonable, things would naturally go smoothly. If they insisted, they would probably have to seek His Majesty's decree. The constable looked at him and bowed. If that's the case, we'll take our leave first. After the bailiffs left, the middle-aged man quickly walked up to Grand Tutor Chu and said loudly, "Father, are you going to watch as they take Ping-er away?" Qinwen is right. The change of dynasties, the rise and fall of clans, these are all fated. How can there be a dynasty that can last for thousands of generations? How can there be a clan that can last forever? Grand Tutor Chu climbed up from the chair with some effort and murmured, "This old man is really old. When one gets old, it's easy to become confused. Father, I'll leave this matter to you." A few constables walked out of the Chu family's door, but they did not leave. This was because in front of them was a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. Where's Chu Ping? Why didn't that beast come out? Is it because the Chu family refuses to release him? Before the constables could answer, the crowd had already surged forward. When the Chu family's gatekeeper saw the black mass of people, he was frightened out of his wits and immediately closed the door. "Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over the murderer. Return Lady Shuang's innocence. The people inside, listen up. You have been surrounded. Hurry up and hand over Chu Ping." Inside the Chu family, they heard the deafening shouts coming from outside. Even the ground beneath their feet was trembling. The faces of the elders were pale, and their hearts were filled with extreme fear. It was not difficult to imagine how many people were outside from the sound and the situation. Once the Chu family's door was breached, the entire Chu family would be razed to the ground. Inside the Chu family's ancestral hall, an elder with white hair and beard faced the memorial tablet of the Chu family ancestor. He knelt on a praying mat as tears streamed down his face. "Unfilial descendant, you have brought shame to the Chu family ancestor." In the capital's county government, County Magistrate Liu, who was flipping through the case files, jumped in fright when he heard the voice that resounded throughout the capital. He was caught off guard, and the pen in his hand fell to the ground. In the imperial palace, Mingzu put down the memorial and slowly walked out of the hall. She looked at the sky outside the palace walls. What's the situation outside? She seemed to be talking to herself. A female official walked over from the side and said respectfully, "Rest assured, Your Highness. I've already sent the imperial guards over. There won't be any trouble." In Hibiscus Garden, Emperor Jing, who was lying on the sickbed, slowly opened his eyes. Changda walked over and closed a window. "Grand Tutor Chu, what a pity." Changda narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "His death is not to be regretted for delaying His Majesty's illness." In the Li family, Li Yi covered the little fellow's ears to prevent him from being frightened by the sounds outside. When the first sound had come, it had startled the little fellow who had been taking an afternoon nap. He immediately bawled. It was not easy to coax him back to sleep, but the sounds outside still continued. His hand covered Li Duan's ears, but a hint of melancholy and pity appeared on his face at this moment. Whether inside or outside the capital, no matter what they were doing, almost everyone stopped what they were doing and raised their heads to look at the sky. In the sky, there were birds fleeing in all directions in fright. "Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over Chu Ping." The Chu family. The tightly shut doors slowly opened. Everyone was about to rush in when they saw the old man with the cane in front of them. They could not help but take a few steps back. The deafening sounds also gradually quieted down. "All of this is my fault." Grand Tutor Chu handed his cane to the servant next to him and slowly knelt in front of the crowd. In a hoarse voice, he said, "I have let down that lady, let down the ancestors of the Chu family, and let down the people of the world. Grandfather, get up. This is not your fault." After a sigh, A figure limped out from the crowd at the back. He walked in front of Grand Tutor Chu and carefully helped him up. He smiled and said, "It's not a good feeling to kneel. You're already so old. Kneeling like this will hurt your legs." Two servants of the Chu family hurriedly helped Grand Tutor Chu. Chu Ping did not even look at the crowd, discussing outside the door. He slowly knelt in front of Grand Tutor Chu and heavily kowtowed. "I didn't mean to kill Lady Shuang Shuang. However, it's no longer important to say these things now. You've brought me to so many places in the past, seen so many sceneries, and met so many people. I'm really grateful to you." Chu Ping kowtowed again. As he stood up, he said, "Everyone says the capital is good. In the past, when I was outside, I always thought about coming back. Only after coming back did I realize that the capital is actually the most boring place. Thank you. I'm sorry." He stood up and apologized to Grand Tutor Chu. He turned to face the vast crowd outside the Chu family and said loudly, "Everything that I, Chu Ping, have done is my own doing. It has nothing to do with the Chu family." Thud, 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 thud. He knelt down on both knees and heavily kowtowed 3 times to the crowd. After the 3 kowtows, there was no more sound. He knelt there silently. The constable closest to him seemed to have thought of something. He took a step forward and gently pushed him. Chu Ping's body fell sideways. A dagger was stabbed straight into his chest. Fresh blood stained his clothes. Chapter 901. Seeing that young Master Chu was clearly no longer breathing, the constable took 2 steps back with a look of disbelief. There was no end to the exclamations in the crowd. No one expected Chu Ping to be dead. He had chosen to commit suicide in front of so many people. Was this suicide to escape punishment or death to atone for his crimes? Pinger, a middle-aged man, rushed out from the Chu family crowd and picked up the corpse on the ground. His face was filled with grief as he wailed out loud. Grand Tutor Chu's body went limp. Fortunately, the Chu family servants behind him supported him, preventing him from falling. After he straightened his body, he waved away the Chu family servants who were supporting him and walked to the constable. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Are you taking his corpse away as well?" The constable immediately took 2 steps back and bowed. The evidence in this case was conclusive. If Chu Ping were still alive, he would naturally be brought to the Ministry of Justice for interrogation. But since he was dead, he had to leave some face for the Chu family. Chu Ping's corpse was brought in, and the Chu family's main door slowly closed. The crowd outside stood in front of the Chu family for a long time, but ultimately did not rush in. Pooey, what bullsh *t? Someone spat viciously at the Chu family's main door before turning to leave. Someone said angrily, "Pooey, that old sycophant. Chu Ping is dead. Miss Shuang Shuang should rest in peace." Another person sighed and walked a few steps before turning back to face the Chu family's main door. Pooey. On this day, nearly all the citizens of the capital came to the Chu family's front door for a tour. Although everyone had left, the Chu family's front door had become filthy. Even the signboard on the front door had been smashed down. A noble family of a generation had been reduced to such a state overnight. It also made countless officials and nobles in the capital realize how powerful the commoners they usually looked down on were. Chu Ping had committed suicide to atone for his crimes, but the Chu family's matter was not over yet. When Grand Tutor Chu was still a scholar in the Jing Kingdom, he had cleansed the emperor's side and admonished the emperor. This was a matter of great moral integrity. But now that his moral integrity had been stripped away, all he had done was to slander the important officials of the court, form a clique for personal gain, harbor evil intentions, and even commit treason, such as forcing the emperor to leave the Golden Palace. Moreover, he had harbored criminals and abused his power for personal gain. How could he escape the punishment of the law? Every generation of Grand Tutors had resigned due to old age. Grand Tutor Chu was the only one who had been stripped of his title by the imperial court. Chu Ping's father had also been stripped of his official position. The Chu family's former glory was gone, and no one ever mentioned the title of the scholarly bones of the Jing Kingdom. under the heavy punishment of the court. Although the Chu manor was still preserved and the property was not confiscated, the people of Jingdo never saw the tightly closed front door of the Chu family open again. None of the great scholars who had once stood with Grand Tutor Chu said anything about this matter. In reality, it wasn't that they didn't say anything. In the beginning, there were some who spoke out, but before the court could react, they all disappeared because of the public opinion. Chu Ping died, and the truth came to light. Lady Shuang's injustice was cleared. The court felt wronged and set up a tomb for her in Jingdo for the people to worship. It also erected a warning monument for the government. The people would forever remember the name Shuang. It was because of her death that the court paid attention to cases of injustice among the people and accelerated the reform of the law. It made the government truly a place to redress the grievances of the people and not a filthy place where those important people abuse their power for personal gain. In this process, there were also some things that happened that exceeded everyone's expectations. After the case was concluded, the capital governor Tsang Shichen, who was deeply involved in this case, was restored to his position. Although he was also fined 3 years of his salary. Compared to the impact of this case and the Chu family's ending, it was really nothing. The reason was that Lady Shuang's older sister was very protective of this Sir Tsang in court. Although she had been arrested and thrown into the Yaman's prison, from beginning to end, she had not been mistreated or treated unfairly. The Yaman's bailiffs had taken good care of her in prison. Even when she was able to walk to the Ministry of Justice, it was the Yaman's people who escorted her. This clearly didn't make sense. If Tsang Shichen really wanted to seal her mouth, then he should have silenced her as soon as possible. Why did he give her so much preferential treatment? Even when she was being tortured, he played it down and went through the motions. In reality, when a few clever people heard this, they had already figured out the whole story. This Sir Tsang had arrested her and thrown her into prison. It looked like he was persecuting her, but he was actually protecting her. This was because the Chu family's background was very deep. Grand Tutor Chu alone could unite many of the great scholars, and even half of the officials in court to slander a pillar of the court who had made a great contribution to this country. What was a capital governor to them? He couldn't resist the Chu family, so he could only use this method to protect the girl. Otherwise, Lady Shuang's case would probably never be overturned. A loyal official became a sycophant, a clean stream became a dirty stream, an upright official became a treacherous official, and then became an upright official again. Just like these days in the capital, the storm rose and then calmed, and then rose again. The injustice of Do-e came to an end, and there was a new show in the brothel. The storm had calmed down a bit, and only a few ripples remained, enough to serve as a side dish for the people of the capital. You're talking about that sycophant. In a bun shop, a scholar in a scholarly robe had just spoken when a bun flew from the front and smashed into his face, followed by an angry voice. Who are you calling a sycophant? Say it again. The scholar picked up the bun that had fallen to the ground and looked at the shopkeeper of the bun shop. He said in a daze, I said that Grand Tutor Chu was a scholar, loved and respected by the people, and trusted by the officials. Who would have thought that he would do such a thing to ruin his reputation? It's really... The shopkeeper of the bun shop looked surprised. Ah, you mean that old sycophant? Who else could it be? The owner of the bun shop waved his hand and said awkwardly, Hi, I'm really sorry. I got addicted to smashing you scholars a while ago. It's fine. That bun is on me. It's free. The Chu family has now completely declined. No one in the capital is willing to have anything to do with them. After the reform of the law, the pressure on the government has increased a lot. Fortunately, after that period of busyness, the pressure has lessened a lot. Most cases are actually not that complicated, and it's not every day that there's a case of injustice. Without Grand Tutor Chu leading the way, that matter could be considered to have completely calmed down. Mingzhu looked at Li Yi and sighed. It's finally over. After a long time without receiving a response, she extended her hand and waved it in front of Li Yi's eyes. Li Yi came back to his senses and asked, what did you just say? Mingzhu looked at him and finally waved her hand. Nothing. How is this the end? Li Yi shook his head. He lifted the curtain of the carriage and said, "This is just the beginning." He jumped down from the carriage and walked towards a building in front of him. It was an ancestral hall. In the ancestral hall, there was a stone tablet. The people of the capital lined up like flowing water. After placing an incense stick in front of the stone tablet, they left through the other side. Li Yi lined up and placed an incense stick in front of the stone tablet. He then stood to the side for a while before walking out. Emingzu was still standing next to the carriage, looking at another carriage. A green-clothed manservant walked over from that side. He bowed and said respectfully, "My master invites you over." Li looked at him and asked, "Who is your master?" "You'll know when you get there, my lord." Li looked at the carriage that was parked in the corner and walked towards it. As he walked to the side of the carriage, the curtain was lifted by a withered hand, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. The old man seemed to have aged another 10 years since the last time he had seen him. Li cupped his hands and said, "Grand Tutor, long time no see." Behind the curtain, the old man looked at him emotionlessly and said in a hoarse voice, "You once asked me if it was worth it. For my own selfishness, I buried the entire Chu clan. It was indeed not worth it." He shook his head, his eyes suddenly becoming sharp. "But the eldest imperial son returning to the capital to inherit the throne is natural. Have you ever thought about what you are doing? What you are doing is worth it. Just what do you want?" He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Prince Jean is young, and you have no contact with the other princes. Tell me, just what do you want?" Li looked at him and slowly asked, "Grand Tutor, do you really want to know?" Grand Tutor Chu said nothing and only stared fixedly at him. Since Grand Tutor wants to know, Li shook his head and walked into the carriage. Grand Tutor Chu leaned forward. He moved his head closer and whispered, "I won't tell you." Chapter 902. As the carriage drove past, there was a violent cough coming from inside. Emingzu turned back to look at Li Yi. "What did you say to Grand Tutor?" Li Yi shook his head. "Nothing." Emingzu looked at the carriage in front again. The coughing gradually faded away. She continued to look at him with a look that said, "Do you believe me? I swear on the honor of a sycophant." Li Yi raised 4 fingers. "I really didn't say anything to him." The main reason for the Chu family's demise was not the Chui family. Under normal circumstances, the 2 crimes that Chu Ping had committed, according to the previous laws of the Jing Kingdom, were nothing more than a high-class person killing a low-class person and having to pay some silver taels. Even Chu Ping himself might not be severely punished. The real reason was Grand Tutor Chu. From his inaction in the beginning, or his shielding, to his worsening later, Grand Tutor Chu could not turn back, nor could the Chu family. All of this was caused by Grand Tutor Chu, who cherished his reputation and was extremely famous. The Chu family rose because of its reputation and was also dragged down by it. It was a century-old family that had fallen to such a state. He had once asked Grand Tutor Chu whether it was worth it or not. Grand Tutor Chu did not answer, but gave the answer with his actions. But no matter what, this old man was once prominent and was still watched by countless people. If he was told that the king of Shu was not his majesty's biological son, and that he wanted Mingzu to be the empress, Grand Tutor Chu might have a heart attack or a brain hemorrhage. If he was not careful, he would not be able to clear his name. The 2 did not get on the carriage again, but walked back. When they were about to walk past the ancestral hall, 2 figures walked toward them. The middle-aged man walking in front raised his head and was slightly stunned. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Lordly." And Mingzu turned back to look at Li Yi, the doubt in her eyes obvious. "Qin He, the 5th son of Prime Minister Qin." Li Yi explained to her, then looked at 5th Master Qin and pointed at his hair, his eyes full of doubt. "Oh, about that." 5th Master Qin smiled and said, "I'm old, so I'm not like you young people." Li Yi nodded and then slightly cupped his hands. "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin, for dealing with the matters in the court recently. Please thank him on my behalf. I will personally visit him another day to thank him. My father is only doing what he thinks is right. We can't say anything." Fifth Master Qin shook his head and said, "However, I will convey Lord Li's message." Li Yi looked at the ancestral hall behind him and asked, "Did you also come to pay your respects to Lady Shuang Shuang?" Fifth Master Qin nodded and said, "Although Lady Shuang Shuang is no longer here, her death is meaningful. There are so many people who remember her, and there are countless people who are deeply grateful to her. Her death alone accomplished something that the entire court could not do. It is worthy of worship." On the way back, Imingzi looked at him and asked, "Is he Qin He, the Qin He that Uncle Wang mentioned?" "What? He doesn't look like him." She shook her head and said, "I just feel that a person who is worthy of Uncle Wang's evaluation shouldn't be like this." Don't be fooled by this fifth master of the Qin clan's sloppy appearance. Li Yi smiled and said, "He's a truly powerful person." In the ancestral hall, after the two of them burned incense in front of the stone tablet, they entered the ancestral hall. As soon as they entered, they saw a statue of a woman the size of a normal person. Below the statue was a spacious platform. After people burned incense outside, they would place the things they brought to pay their respects on this platform. The burly man asked mysteriously, "Fifth Master, the person beside Lord Li just now was the princess? What, do I not look like her?" Fifth Master Qin casually asked as he placed a plate of pastries in the box on the platform. "To be honest, she doesn't look like her." The burly man nodded. Just as he was wondering why he hadn't noticed before, he suddenly heard a cracking sound. He turned his head to look at Fifth Master beside him and said in surprise, "Fifth Master, where did you get the apple in your hand?" Fifth Master Qin casually pointed to the fruit plate on the platform that was clearly missing an apple. "There, it tastes pretty good. Do you want it?" "This." The burly man looked at him in disbelief. "This was given to Lady Shuang Shuang by someone else." "Fifth Master, you Shuang Shuang." Fifth Master Qin shook his head and said, "She doesn't like eating apples. It's a waste to keep it." Crack. Another sound. "What are you doing over there?" At this moment, there were still many people in the ancestral hall. When someone raised his head and saw this scene, he immediately stood up in anger. "You even dare to eat something given to Lady Shuang Shuang. Has your conscience been eaten by a dog?" "What? Who did it? Take them to the officials." The burly man grabbed an apple and grabbed Fifth Master Qin's arm. He hurriedly said, "What are you waiting for? Run." A moment later, in an alley in Jingdou, Fifth Master Qin panted heavily. He patted a footprint on his body and asked, "What? How is this apple?" The burly man took a bite and nodded. "It's crispy and sweet. Why doesn't Lady Shuang Shuang like it?" Fifth Master Qin leaned against the wall and sighed. "Yes, I also don't understand why she doesn't like it." He was silent for a moment. After waiting for the burly man to finish eating the apple, he said, "Wu Er, how long have you been following me?" The burly man froze for a moment. In the next moment, he threw away the apple and clapped his hands. Solemnly, he said, "Fifth Master, tell me, what do you want me to do this time?" "Go follow the little Duke and see what he's been doing these days. I'm the best at following people." The burly man patted his chest. "With me doing things, Fifth Master can rest assured. The trail is broken." Li Yi sighed and said, "How could it be broken?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice and the Secret Intelligence Bureau couldn't find anything. The person behind this case must have great power in Jingdou." Li Yi rubbed the space between his brows and suddenly felt a headache coming on. He tilted his head to look at the princess and said helplessly, "Now, there's only the Chui family left. Why don't we choose another path?" Imingzi looked at him and asked in confusion, "What path?" "I know a path that leads directly to the central lake of the Academy of Mathematics. If we go at night, we'll definitely not be discovered. Why don't we take advantage of the darkness and wind? Sink the Chui family into the lake." You also think this is a good idea, right? It's simple, convenient, and saves time. Do you want me to help you kidnap Consort Chui out of the palace? If you can help, that would be great. Li met her eyes. Louis quickly looked out the window. A moment later, Li Yi shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's dark, and I can't see the road clearly. Let's think about it at length." If the Chui family could be taken down so easily, father wouldn't have waited until now. Mingzu shook her head and said, 20 years ago, their power had already seeped into every corner of the imperial court. They also have a good reputation among the people. Although they are not as powerful as before, they still have a foundation that cannot be underestimated. Li Yi sighed and said, that's why I said it's more convenient to choose another path. Fong strode in from outside and handed him an envelope. He said, young master, there's news from Wu Er. Li Yi opened the envelope and looked at it. He handed it to Lu Yi and said with a smile, isn't it connected now? Chapter 903. Li Yi handed the letter to Lu Yishui and said, keep an eye on Xinyu. You should be able to find something. Lu Yishui took the letter and looked at it. He nodded and said, I understand. Mingzu seemed to understand what he wanted to do. When she walked into the courtyard, she turned around and asked, are you going to deal with the Chui family the same way you dealt with the Chu family? The Chui family has many henchmen. They won't do many things themselves. As long as the matter of the king of Shu is not exposed, unless the Chui family is plotting a rebellion, it won't have much impact on the general situation. Li Yi shook his head and said, let's take one step at a time. A dam of 1,000 miles will collapse because of an ant's nest. If we add up all the things one by one, it might be the last straw that breaks the camel's back. Mingzhu's tone was firm. We can't let father know about that matter no matter what. Of course I know that. Otherwise, the Chui family will die countless times for this crime. Li Yi had thought about this contradiction many times. It was obvious that it was easy to destroy the Chui family through that matter, but it was easier to destroy the old emperor. They couldn't take this risk. The two reached a tacit understanding on this matter. There was nothing to discuss. Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu on the other side of the courtyard. She seemed to have just finished practicing. He thought for a moment and waved his hand. Rui, come here for a moment. Mississippi Lu put down autumn water and walked over. She cast an inquiring look at him. Li Yi looked at the two standing together. After a moment, he looked at Mississippi Lu and said in surprise, I find that you have been growing recently. I remember that you were shorter than the princess at the beginning. Now you're the same height. Mississippi Lu looked at him. When have I ever been shorter than her? Ah, you didn't? Li Yi shook his head and said, then I must have remembered wrongly again. I don't know what happened to my memory recently. Li Yi walked the princess out the door and saw sister-in-law, Fong, walking over from afar. When he saw the person beside her, he was instantly stunned. He closed his eyes in disbelief, and when he opened them again, sister-in-law Fong was already talking to the woman beside her with a smile. Li looked back at Mississippi Lu and asked, who's the girl next to Mrs. Fong? I've never seen her before. Mississippi Lu looked in that direction and said, yesterday, when Aunt Fong went to the temple to offer incense, she met Miss Xiao on the road. Miss Xiao came to the capital to seek shelter with her relatives, but she couldn't find her and was robbed of her traveling expenses. Aunt Fong pitied her and temporarily took her in. Miss Xiao. Li nodded and sighed. Sister-in-law Fong is really kind. Sister-in-law Fong actually treats people very well, and Uncle Fong is also not bad. It's just that he look a little fierce usually. Li nodded. Speaking of which, you two are quite similar, but you don't know how to use a broom when you fight, which is much better than her. Mississippi Lu's temper had really improved recently, and Li couldn't help but feel that his youth was gone forever. She could even cook a bowl of noodles that tasted pretty good by herself. The unruly, willful, unreasonable, and unworldly Mississippi Lu seemed to be gone forever. Of course, the person who made him feel that time could change a person the most was Fong. He had quietly sent sister-in-law Fong's biggest enemy to her side, and the two of them could get along with each other like sisters. There was harmony inside and outside the house. He didn't think he had the ability to do so. Some things have to be faced. I don't have the ability of the son-in-law, so of course I have to find another way. When Fong said this, his face was shrouded in a sacred glow. For him, this was indeed a big deal. To be able to let sister-in-law Fong and Little Red get along like sisters. This was simply a fantasy, unbelievable, and something that he didn't even dare to think about in the past. In contrast, his own affairs were more difficult to deal with. Although Drunk Mo's tone had relaxed these days, it seemed that she was still not completely mentally prepared. And this was just Drunken Mo. The road was long, and the revolution had not yet succeeded. Comrades still needed to work hard. In the old house of the Zheng family, Drunken Mo helped them make tea. When they walked back to the room, Seng Shichen said, "After this incident, the Chui family probably doesn't trust me much anymore." This did not come as a surprise to Li Yi. That case involved a lot of people, and it was the focus of the entire capital. Removing him from it would undoubtedly be a hell of a challenge. One careless move, and it would cause a wave of public opinion. When the Chui family knew that they couldn't protect the Chu family, they had actually used the power of the court to protect him, the capital governor. However, they encountered great obstacles, and in the end, they had no choice but to stop. In this way, the subsequent reversal of public opinion seemed extremely suspicious. With the protection of that girl, if the Chui family still didn't suspect them, they would have been eaten up in the capital. Although the king of Shu is still in Shuzhou, as long as His Majesty doesn't appoint a crown prince, he is still the most promising. Tang Shichen looked at him and said slowly, "Once something happens to His Majesty, the king of Shu will inherit the throne. This is almost without a doubt. Until now, are you still not willing to tell me which side you are on? Although the Chui family probably won't do anything to you, you still have to be careful." Li Yi didn't answer. He just warned him and turned to go inside. A thoughtful look appeared on Seng Shichen's face. After a moment, he dipped his finger in the tea and wrote 2 words on the table. Soon, he crossed out the 2 words Prince Jean on the stone table. In the situation where His Majesty still had adult princes, the possibility of a child inheriting the throne was too small. For the sake of the overall situation, His Majesty would not make such a choice. On this point, Li Yi definitely knew better than he did. As for the other princes, whether it was status or talent, they were far inferior. More importantly, those princes were far away in their fiefdoms, and Li Yi had no contact with them. Apart from Prince Jean, among the princes, there was not a single one who had both a high status and a close relationship with him. However, he had a close relationship with the princesses. She had offended the king of Shu for Princess Yongning, causing the Chui family to see him as a thorn in their side. Princess Shaoning was also very close to him, and there was no barrier when they got along. As for the eldest princess, needless to say, it was said that they were close friends when they were in Qing and Prefecture. In the past few years in the capital, the eldest princess established the Women's College and the Women's Union. She was deeply loved by the women in the capital and founded the academy, which won the hearts of the scholars in the world. Ever since she took over the government, all the civil and military officials in the court would praise the eldest princess when they mentioned her. There were countless officials in the court who were as loyal to her as they were to His Majesty, who would still dare to treat her as a woman. Not to mention, great scholar Chu's actions backfired and he lost the hearts of the people. Her Highness reformed the law, which was also applauded by the people. Behind all these things, there was actually his shadow. It was strange that he didn't know what he was thinking. Instead of supporting a prince, he spared no effort to do these things for the eldest princess. What was he thinking? Tang Shichen picked up the teacup and put it down again, the expression on his face frozen. Chapter 904. In the room, Madame Chun was teaching drunken ink embroidery. For the daughters of the noble families in the capital city, embroidery was a necessary skill. Most of them would embroider their wedding dresses with their own hands before they got married. Seeing Li Yi come in, she quickly hid the wedding dress. Li Yi didn't know what she was thinking. She actually looked at the wedding dress more secretively than the belly band. He had even seen her wearing the belly band several times, but she didn't even show him a wedding dress that wasn't embroidered. Madame Chun put their hands together and said, "You two, it's time to pick a day and set the date early. You can't keep dragging it on like this." It's still early. Drunken Ink lowered her head and whispered. Li glanced at her and said, What do you mean it's still early? It's not early. Watching her break free from his hand and run out quickly, Li shook his head helplessly. Although she usually looked very bold, after the two of them got closer, she became shy. Third Miss Chun looked at her running out with a smile. After a long time, she turned her head and sighed, saying, You are still young and don't know the dangers of the court. A family can live in peace and harmony. Even if it's a little dull, it's much better than facing those deceitful battles every day. He lowered his head, but didn't speak. No one liked to live in deceit and conspiracy all day long. Compared with this, wasn't it more interesting to play with the children, Rui, and the proud Lolita at home? If you want stability, you must first endure turbulence. She looked outside the door. The two women were talking about something. She turned back and said, I think Ruwatching is also thinking about you. Although Drunken Ink is here, you can't always ignore her. I can see that her heart is actually more bitter than anyone else. You can't let her down. I know. Li looked outside the door and nodded. I won't. She looked at Li, and a rare hint of resentment appeared on her face. Your father was so devoted back then. In order to elope with your mother, he didn't even want the inheritance of his family. Why is it that when it comes to you, you just have to provoke so many debts of love? An awkward expression appeared on Li's face. Unable to refute, he could only remain silent. She patted the back of Li's hand and said, All right, it's your good fortune to be able to gain the favor of so many wonderful people. I only hope that in the future, you won't hurt anyone's heart. After saying that, he stood up and said with a smile, When it comes to you, I can't help but talk too much. Accompany them well, I'm going back. Li stood up at the same time and saw her out. He watched as Chun Chon walked out of the tea house across the street. A servant girl of the Chun estate helped her into the carriage. Just as Chun Chon was about to get into the other carriage, Li suddenly asked, Is official Chun this free every day? Chun Chon's hand, which had already lifted the curtain, lowered again. He countered with a question. Could it be that officially plans to go to the princess and report me? I'm not the kind of person who would report on someone. Li shook his head. I just want to advise official Chun that you are an official of the imperial court. Every month, there will be a few days where you have to pretend to be working hard. Of course, other than this, I also have a small matter to remind official Chun. He slightly lowered his voice and said, Stay as far away from the Chui clan as possible. A scornful expression appeared on Chun Chong's face. Just as he was about to speak, he heard the second half of Chun Chongqing's words and froze. He asked, What do you mean? Official Chun will understand. Li looked at him and said once more. Then he turned and walked back into the courtyard. Chun Chong was left standing there, his expression solemn. Thousands of thoughts had already flashed through his mind, and in the end, they all boiled down to a certain message. The Chui clan was probably going to change. When Li walked back, Zue Imo walked out of the room and asked, Has Madame Chun left? She's gone back. Li walked over and put his arm around her slender waist. She asked me to spend more time with you too. Who? Who asked you to spend more time? She looked frantically at Sang Shichen, who was sitting in the courtyard drinking tea, and hurriedly pushed him away. Then she seemed to realize something. Looking at him, she asked uncertainly, You too? Li turned and walked quickly in Sang Shichen's direction. Lord Sung, what do you think about that matter just now? I think that the king of Shu has no talent or virtue, and is indeed not suitable for the throne. Otherwise, the country that His Majesty and the courtiers have painstakingly stabilized would probably be destroyed in his hands. Sang Shichen thought for a moment and said, Among the many princes, His Highness King Jin is an outstanding person, and his status is equally noble. However, King Jin is too young, and it is difficult for him to ascend to the throne. At present, apart from His Majesty, the only one who can govern the country well is the eldest princess. However, the eldest princess has already set a precedent by assisting the government. It is really... Li looked at him in surprise and asked, Is this what we were talking about just now? What Sang Shichen said was very reasonable. In fact, The more they talked about it, the more he felt how difficult it was to let Mingzu wear that uniform and experience the temptation of the dragon robe. Their original purpose was just to prevent this great country from falling into the hands of the king of Shu. Now, the king of Shu had been eliminated in advance. She did not want the old emperor to know about this, but she would never agree to let the Li family's country fall into the hands of others. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Her Highness nodded. That's right. No matter what, this country cannot fall into the hands of the king of Shu. This pavilion had become a place where the two of them talked in secret more and more frequently, because there was lake water everywhere and the sound of waves was mixed in. Unless someone had clairvoyance and hearing, they would not be able to hear what they were talking about. He looked around. There seemed to be a flash of light in the trees by the shore of the lake, and disappeared in an instant. Ming suddenly said, King Ning has returned to Qing in prefecture. Li looked back at her and asked, It is already June. They should have returned long ago. What's so strange about this? It is because King Ning has returned that it is strange. Mingzu shook her head and said, This time, only King Ning has returned and taken the military seal. It is enough to mobilize 2,000 soldiers. What can 2,000 soldiers do? It is enough to confiscate the ancestral home of the Chui family in Qing and prefecture. As for rebellion, I'm afraid it is far from enough. Li Mingzhu looked at the surface of the lake for a long time before turning around. A hint of confusion appeared on her face. I suspect that Fu Huang and Ning Wangshu are hiding something from us, and from the court officials. I can't see it. In the low trees by the lake, Li Xian looked at the two people in the pavilion with their backs facing him and murmured helplessly. With great difficulty, he saw Mingzu turn around. He immediately became alert and tightened his grip on the binoculars in his hands. I am pregnant with Father, Emperor from the court officials. He frowned and murmured, You spoke so fast. How can I hear you clearly? A look of doubt surfaced on his face. What exactly was Ming Zhu thinking? She had hidden it from Uncle Huang and the court officials. She seemed to be at a loss. Clatter. As if realizing something, he sucked in a cold breath. Shock appeared on his face. The binoculars in his hands suddenly fell to the ground, and he jumped out of the bushes. Li Yi and Mingzu raised their heads and saw Li Xian, who was wearing a garland made of tree branches and decorated with a few small flowers. Surprise appeared on their faces at the same time. Chapter 905. Today, Li Xian was dressed in dark clothes, and the wreath of branches on his head was particularly eye-catching. If he smeared some camouflage paint on his face, he would look even more like the real deal. I saw what you said just now. He ran all the way here, panting heavily, and the shock on his face had not faded. Li did not know why he was dressed like this, and asked in surprise, What did you see? Li Xian pointed at the binoculars hanging around his neck, and Li Yi was even more confused. Li Xian looked at the two of them, and his eyes were filled with extreme surprise. I don't need to listen to what you're saying. I only need to look at your lips to know what you're saying. Li looked at him, and his expression was slightly shocked. You've learned to read lips? Without waiting for Li Xian to nod, he remembered that during this period of time, whenever the two of them spoke, he would always stare at his own lips. Could it be that he was really learning to read lips? Then he looked at the binoculars hanging around his neck. Could it be that the purpose of him learning to read lips was to peep and eavesdrop? This guy, what was going on in his mind? Li Yi's lips moved, and he asked in disbelief, Did you see what I said just now? It's useless even if you scold me. Li Xian's gaze swept back and forth between the two of them, and he said, I've already seen what you've said just now. Li Yi and Mingzu looked at each other, and they both felt a headache coming on. The reason why the two of them chose this place was to avoid Li Xian. After all, with his character of wanting to see the world in chaos, if he knew about this matter, he might cause some trouble. But no matter how careful they were, they never expected that he would purposely learn to read lips, and the binoculars hanging around his neck were probably high-quality products from the Academy of Science. How could there be such a bored person in the world? This is really too disgraceful. A worried expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He looked at Imingzu and said with a pained expression, You are the princess, you too. How could you do such a thing? Looking at the extremely agitated Li Xian, Li looked back at Imingzu and said, Why don't we sink into the lake? Looks like we can't hide it anymore. Li sighed and looked at Imingzu again and asked, You or me? Li Mingzhu waved her hand and sat on a stone chair to the side. She looked at the calm lake and said, Speak. Li nodded. He looked at Li Xian and asked again, What did you hear just now? You don't have to test me. Li Xian glanced at the two of them and said, If the imperial uncle, the court officials, and the entire world were to find out about this disgraceful and heinous act, the two of you would no longer have a place in the Jin kingdom. Li shook his head. It seemed that he was really bored to a certain extent, and indeed learned to read lips. At this point, there was no need to test him anymore. Although the king of Shu has been chased to Shu province, and his reputation has been ruined, he is still the eldest son of the emperor. If something happens to his majesty, he will most likely make a comeback, and even ascend the throne. Li looked at him and said, The princes of his majesty have no talent or virtue. If the world falls into their hands, it will end in defeat sooner or later. We have come step by step to where we are today, and we can't let the court go back to its original path. Moreover, with the power in Mingzhu's hands, she will not have a good ending for any of the princes who succeed the throne. Hearing this, Li Xian's face darkened. How could he not understand this logic? Only Uncle Emperor was broad-minded enough to allow the eldest princess to rule the country and hand over all the affairs of the country to her. Until now, most of the court officials had acquiesced to the eldest princess's existence. But if the new emperor succeeded the throne, he would definitely not allow these powers to be held in the hands of princess. Even the Academy of Sciences would be out of his control. The precondition for their peace was that Uncle Huang was still in control of the country. Once he was gone, many people's fates would be turned upside down. However, although this was the truth, it had nothing to do with what they said. That was not the point. One was an unmarried princess, and the other was an important official with a family. The two of them were together secretly, and no one would find out, and everything would be fine. But now that Imingzu was pregnant, they could not hide it for long. Once this matter was made public, it would become the biggest scandal in the royal family, and the two of them would be condemned by everyone. Even if they could keep their lives, they would no longer have a place in the Jin kingdom. Why are you so careless? Li Xian looked at them exasperatedly and sighed and said, Go to a place where no one knows you, and don't come back. Let me finish first. Li looked at him calmly, and Li Xian looked at him, lowered his head, and said, Go ahead. Actually, Prince Jin is the most suitable person to inherit his majesty's position. Li looked in the direction of the arithmetic school and said slowly, But he is too young and can't take up the heavy responsibilities, so why are you saying this to me at this time? Shut up, let me finish. After Li Xian completely shut up, Li said again, So, we have to push Mingzhu to that position. Li Xian was stunned and looked at him in surprise and asked, Push to what position? His Majesty's position. Li Xian looked at him and then looked at Mingzhu and rubbed his head and waved his hand. Wait a minute, I'm a little confused now. Let me sort it out first. After a long time, he raised his head again and asked, Isn't Mingzhu pregnant? Her Royal Highness stood up abruptly, and her pretty face blushed. She looked at him and said angrily, What nonsense are you talking about? Li Xian said in a daze, I clearly saw that you said you were pregnant. How long have you been learning to read lips? Li thought for a moment and suddenly asked. Less than a month, Li Xian said after thinking for a moment. Li looked straight at him and asked, You rushed over because you thought Mingzhu was pregnant? Li Xian nodded and said confidently, What else could it be? What you said just now, was it because of this? Li rubbed his forehead and asked again. Li Xian was surprised and said, Could it be that Mingzhu is not pregnant and I'm seeing things? After saying that, he suddenly had a look of realization and looked straight at Li. Wait, what did you say just now? What position should we push Imingzu to? Li sighed and turned to look at Imingzu. Why don't we just sink? Chapter 906. Such an important matter. Li Xian's face was gloomy as he paced back and forth in the pavilion. Occasionally, he pointed at the two of them. You, Li Yi, and Imingzu were both silent. Influenced by their traditional education and beliefs, this was the first time they had heard of this matter. It was indeed difficult for them to accept. How dare you not tell me? Li Xian slammed his palm on the stone table and asked angrily, Such an important matter. How dare you hide it from me? Are you not treating me as one of your own? The anger on his face only lasted for a moment before disappearing in the next moment. He clapped his hands and said with a face full of surprise, Why didn't I think of this idea before? To him, it would be best if he could maintain the current status quo. However, no matter who inherited the throne, with his identity and position, he would not have a good life in the capital. However, who was Imingzu? She had grown up with him, and the three heroes of the capital had gone through thick and thin together. It was as if they were wearing the same pants. Although it was the two of them who were wearing the same pants now, based on the current situation, if Imingzu could really sit on the throne, it would definitely be the best outcome. However, although she was also the child of the emperor, she was a woman. Would it be difficult for a woman to become the emperor? Thinking about it carefully, the dragon robe did not look good on her either. This matter is not certain yet. Let's not talk about it for now. Li Yi pressed on his shoulder to calm him down. He said, You cannot tell anyone about what happened today, including His Majesty, your father, mother, the crown princess, and your brother Shun. Don't worry, I know the severity of this matter. Other than the three of us, I will not let a fourth person know. Li Xian nodded solemnly, then said, Based on what you said, the biggest obstacle in front of us now is the Chui family. The Chui family has done such a rebellious thing, and they're still jumping around in the court all day long. It is really annoying to see. Should we go all out? He turned his head to look. I think this lake in the academy is not bad. Although he didn't know from whom did Li Xian learn this unreliable idea of sinking into the lake, he was right about one thing. As long as the Chui family didn't fall, they wouldn't have peaceful days. This time, it was fine if they didn't make a move, but if they made a move, the Chui family wouldn't be able to make a comeback, once and for all. As for the secret between the two of them being known by him, it did not affect them much. Li Xian, who was born with a short brain, was muddle-headed on many things, but he had never messed up on a major matter. At least he knew that in the future, he wouldn't be like before, always causing trouble at the drop of a hat. He came out to wander around after learning half of lip reading and ended up making such a big mistake. However, this incident also reminded him that there were even perverts in this world who specialized in lip reading and hid in the dark with binoculars to peep at him. In the future, no matter what he did, it was better to be extra careful. After stepping into the house, all the messy thoughts in his mind disappeared. Wife, children, sister-in-law, and the little servant girl who was about to grow up and was gradually getting rid of the silly adorable. This was another small world, blocking all the things that were incompatible with the word home outside. Mississippi Lou was holding a piece of paper in her hand and saying something to Rui. It was probably because she encountered some words that she didn't know. Rui was the kind of person who could calm down no matter what she did. When the two sisters were young, they also did literacy and other things, but it was probably useless for Mississippi Lou. Lee picked up a few pieces of paper that were messily placed on the table and looked at them. Most of them were about the Lou League. The Lou League had already formed a stable system. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was an organization. The elite disciples were all skilled in martial arts. They were famous martial arts masters on the master ranking list and the chivalry ranking list. As for other places, it was more of a relationship similar to a contract. There were many masters in the league, and they had strong financial support. They took what they needed from the people in the martial arts world and cooperated with tacit understanding. It could be said that they had completely changed the current situation of the martial arts world. As the leader of the Lu League, Mississippi Lu's growth was amazing. Of course, this did not refer to a specific part of her body. Other than physical growth, there was also psychological growth. Thinking back to 3 years ago, the girl in white who was riding on a horse and holding a sword, and now the girl who frowned and bit her thumb, staring at the piece of paper in front of her seriously, were like two different people. There was another stack of papers on the table. Li also flipped through them. They were all information about the Wu Kingdom. As the only country in the vicinity that had fallen into internal strife, although the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom was strong, there were too many rebels and traitors in the country. It could not be suppressed in a short time. The surrounding countries might have some other ideas besides watching them make a fool of themselves. Seeing him walk in, Ru-Yi seemed to have seen her savior. She hurriedly said, "Aya, my husband is back." Quickly help Ru-Yi take a look at what's written on this. I've been having a headache these past few days. The reason why Ru-Yi had a headache was that Mississippi. Lu would ask her whenever she encountered something that she did not understand. In fact, Ru-Yi only recognized a few more words than her. When it came to the meaning of poems and articles, she would also have a headache. As for why Mississippi, Lu did not ask him directly. He also felt strange. After Ru-Yi spoke, Mississippi, Lu reluctantly handed the paper to him. Li glanced at it and knew the reason why Mississippi, Lu had a headache. This was something similar to the Imperial Court's spy report. The words and sentences were not like ordinary letters. It was very official and difficult to understand. It was normal for people like Mississippi Lu, who were still in the stage of literacy, to not understand it. Li looked at it and said, "It says that Princess Duanrong of the Wu Kingdom joined forces with a traitor and conquered 2 provinces of the Wu Kingdom in a row. She was captured alive by the Imperial Court and will be executed in a few days." What? Mississippi Lu's expression changed dramatically. Of course it's a lie. Li put the paper aside and said, "It's true that they conquered 2 provinces. They have a lot of soldiers under their command. They used to be in the military camp and have good strength. Now they are in a stalemate with the Imperial Court of the Wu Kingdom. Nothing will happen in a short time." Mississippi Lu took a deep breath, and her chest rose and fell a few times. She looked at him and said, "Come here, I'll show you something good." Did she think he was stupid? If he went with her now, nothing good would come out of it. Li took Li Duan from Rui's arms. After such a long time of guidance, the 8-month-old little guy could make clearer father and mother. Of course, he still called Xiaonyang more often. Rui sat down beside him and said softly, "I went to see Sister Zumo today." Li turned to look at her. "I've already talked to Sister Zumo. She said that after a few days, she will move in with us." Li looked at her in surprise. She agreed? Rui looked at him in confusion and asked, "Why not?" Li suddenly doubted the meaning of life. He nagged her about this matter every day. All his efforts were not as good as a word from Rui. This was a bit too hurtful. When he walked out of the door gloomily, he met a little maid who came in. She looked up at him and said, "Young master, second miss asked you to go to her room. She has a question to ask you." What question could he not ask just now? Why did he have to go to her room? Walking to Mississippi Lu's room on the other side, the door was open. Li knocked on the door and stepped in. Mississippi Lu sat at the table, looked up, and said, "Close the door." Li closed the door, then turned his head and asked in confusion, "What's the problem? Why close the door?" Chapter 907. At the door of Mississippi Lu's room, Xiao Huan leaned against a pillar while munching on melon seeds. She carefully listened to the movements inside the room. Inside the room, Li was thrown onto the bed. He covered his buttocks and glared at Mississippi Lu angrily. He said he had a question for her. He was just curious why she closed the door. It turned out that she was going to beat him up. What a heartless fellow. To think that he was so kind and considerate of her. Li looked at her warily and threatened, "If you continue to act like this, I won't accompany you to the Wu Kingdom." "What did you say?" Mississippi Lu was stunned. Her hand, that was about to fall, stopped in the air. She asked, "What did you say just now? Say it again." "I was thinking of accompanying you to the Wu Kingdom after I'm done with my work. Now, I need to think about it." His original intention was not to go to the Wu Kingdom. Counting the days, Lin Wanru should have reached the Qi Kingdom by now. The business there was about to start. In this year, the situation in the fringe had also changed greatly. Every once in a while, there would be news. He had to go and take a look. Since Mississippi Lu was so concerned about her precious disciple, he might have to make a trip to the Wu Kingdom. Of course, before leaving the capital, he had to solve all the remaining problems. To the Wu Kingdom, Mississippi Lu's beautiful eyes lit up. She asked when. "I was thinking of a month or two." Li shook his head and said, "But now, I'm not going." "You." Mississippi Lu's face was filled with anger. The slender hand that was about to fall fiercely stopped in midair, fell again. But this time, it was with a gentle force. A faint smile appeared on her face. She asked with concern, "Does it still hurt?" Li did not have the chance to enjoy Mississippi Lu's gentle massage. He jumped up from the bed and ran out of the door at an unbelievable speed. As he ran out, he grabbed Xiao Huan's melon seeds. He ate them while thinking, "So gentle, so gentle. Mississippi Lu is crazy. She's really crazy. Miss, what are we moving over? Miss, do you want me to help you pack? Miss, if we move over, what about Sister Ruoqing? Since elder sister Ruoqing is going there, Xiao Zhu will also go there, right?" Zheng Zimo, who was embroidering a wedding dress, raised her head and glanced at Xiao Chui, who was carrying a small bag and wandering in front of her for almost an hour. Zheng Zimo lowered her head again and said, "If you really can't wait, move over first. Anyway, there are other maids in the manor." Xiao Chui hurriedly put down the small bundle and came over with a smile. How could Xiao Chui understand Miss better than the other maids? "Of course, I want to be with Miss." Goddess Luo Shui waved her hand and said, "Stay away from me. You're blocking the light." After chasing Xiao Chui away, he lowered his head and looked at a pattern on the wedding dress. He stared blankly for a long time before a vexed expression appeared on his face. "Oh no, I forgot what kind of needle technique to use on this piece." She put the wedding dress and the needle and thread aside and walked towards Ruoqing's room. She remembered that when she was teaching her yesterday, she had demonstrated the steps on another brocade handkerchief. During the day, there was usually no one in her room. Sometimes there were too many things to do, and she might not come back at night. She pushed open the door and very quickly found the brocade handkerchief on the table. She picked it up and looked at it for a while. Not long after, she remembered the steps and put the brocade handkerchief back. Just as she was about to leave, her footsteps suddenly stopped. She turned around and looked at the bed. On the bed, under the pillow, the corner of a book was exposed. She was startled. This was the booklet that was pressed under the pillow by elder sister Ruoqing. For her to hide it like this, it must be something very important or private. Even if the two of them were very close, it would not be good to take it out and look at it when she was not around. She shook her head and walked in the direction of the door. When she walked to the door, her footsteps stopped again, and she looked back at the bedside. How about just taking a look? She looked left and right, closed the door like a thief, and returned to the bedside. She carefully took out the booklet onto the pillow. There were no words on the cover. She carefully flipped to the next page. The first year of Jing He, the first day of the 7th month. It was indeed elder sister Ruoqing's diary. She knew that Ruoqing had the habit of writing diaries since she was young. Although she did not write every day, she had accumulated a few thick books. At that time, she actually wanted to peek at elder sister Ruoqing's little secrets. However, Ruoqing hid it very well. After a few unsuccessful attempts, she gave up. At this moment, although she was a little frightened, she was actually a little excited that her wish had been fulfilled. Her gaze quickly moved up. The first year of Jing He, the first day of the 7th month. What happened in that year's 7th month? That sour scholar wrote a love poem for her and was chased out of the jade courtyard by her mother. This matter was actually written in by her. The matter of him secretly eating osmanthus cake. So it was at that time that she was discovered poem from beyond the heavens. What nameless scholar? It was clearly that annoying fellow. Mid-Autumn Festival. The matter on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival. That fellow. She slowly flipped through the pages, and a smile appeared on her pretty face. These were all things that they had experienced together in the past. Now that she recalled it, those memories and feelings from that time would surge out from her mind. She murmured a few words. That annoying fellow. Why is he everywhere? Even elder sister Ruoqing's diary. She lowered her head and continued to flip through the pages. As the pages turned, the smile on her face gradually froze and dissipated. Then, it became a little pale, and a deep sense of loss and confusion began to appear in her eyes. Wan Ruoqing walked into the courtyard and saw Xiao Chui sitting alone in the courtyard. She looked around and asked, Xiao Chui, where is Zuinmo? Xiao Chui was holding a triangular prism in her hand. After watching the sunlight pass through it, it became colorful. She was playing happily under the sun. Hearing Wan Ruoqing's voice, she put down the thing in her hand and stood up. She said, Elder Sister Ruoqing is back. Miss was here just now. She should have returned to her room now. She looked back and saw Zheng Zuinmo walking out of her room. She walked over and said, Miss, Elder Sister Ruoqing is back. Wan Ruoqing walked over and said with a smile, The fish he sent yesterday is said to be a tribute from the palace. It's a river fish without many bones. He was worried that they wouldn't know how to cook it, so he told me how to cook it. It's been hot these days. Although it's frozen, it's better to eat it as soon as possible. Lee is so good to Mississippi. He sends fish every few days. The tribute from the palace is really much more delicious than the ones in the market. Xiao Chui said with a smile. Seeing Xiao Zhu holding her treasure and looking it up and down, she immediately trotted over and said anxiously, This is a gift from Li. Xiao Zhu curled her lips and walked around the stone table with her. So what if he gave it to you? Can I play with it? Xiao Chui said with dissatisfaction. Li gave it to me first. I haven't let you play with it yet. You are robbing me. Xiao Zhu stopped and looked at her. Are we still good sisters? Just let me play with it. Xiao Chui also stopped and hesitated. After a moment, she said, Okay, but after you play with it, you have to give it back to me. Wan Ruoqing looked at the door of her room and then at her. She asked in confusion, Why did you come out of my room? Zheng Zumo smiled and said, I'm stupid. I forgot the needle technique you taught me yesterday, so I went in and looked at it again. It's okay. If you forget, I will teach you again. A woman only gets married once in her life. The wedding dress must be embroidered well. You can't be careless. She smiled and said, Wait a moment. I will go to the room to get the needle and thread. Zheng Zumo nodded and walked to the stone table in a daze. Beside her, Xiao Chui looked at Xiao Zhu, who was playing with the prism under the sun. She couldn't help but laugh. Stupid. You don't even know how to do such a simple thing. I will teach you. She looked at the two girls who were laughing and scolding each other, then looked at Wan Ruoqing, who walked into the room. She felt that the wedding dress in her hand was a bit dazzling. Chapter 908. Sister Ruoqing's fish is so delicious. Xiao Chui put a mouthful of fish in her mouth and couldn't help but exclaim. Unlike her mistress, she didn't really like eating fish, but she always made an exception with Sister Ruoqing. If there was someone in this world who could cook as good as Li, it would definitely be Sister Ruoqing. Xiao Zhu pinched her face and said, You're the one who can eat the most. You can have the leftovers later. Looking at the two girls playing, Wan Ruoqing smiled and turned to look at Zheng Zumo, who was holding a pair of chopsticks in her hand and stupidly putting the fish in her mouth, but not chewing. She asked in confusion, Zumo, what's wrong? Is today's food not to your taste? Zheng Zumo came back to her senses and shook her head. No, I just don't feel well. Wan Ruoqing put down her chopsticks and touched her forehead. She looked at her and shook her head. It's not hot, but you don't look well. I'll go find a doctor. No need, I'm just a bit tired. I'll be fine after eating and resting. Zheng Zumo shook her head again and said, Sister Ruoqing, I'm moving over soon. You should come with us. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and smiled. I won't be going. Xiao Zhu and I will move back to Willow Lane. We've lived there for a long time and are used to it. Sung Zumo lowered her head and was silent for a while. She suddenly asked, if I take away something you like very much, what will Sister Ruoqing do? Wan Ruoqing was surprised. What thing? She looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes and said in a low voice, there's something that Sister Ruoqing likes very much. It's something that is very important to you. We both like it very much, but you liked it first. Wan Ruoqing smiled and put a piece of fish in her bowl. Take it if you like it. I don't have anything that I like very much or that's very important to me. What if it's that piece of paper with Immortal Magpie Bridge on it? Wan Ruoqing paused in the middle of taking back her chopsticks. Soon, she smiled and nodded. Sure, but I left it in the brothel. I'll bring it to you when I come back tonight. Under the dim candlelight, Wan Ruoqing spread out the yellowed paper. Some parts of the paper had already become tattered. She gently stroked the words on the paper with a faint smile on her face. She didn't know how much time had passed until the oil lamp lit up. She folded it again and walked out the door. She lowered her head and looked at the thing in her hand with some reluctance. Then she knocked on the door next door. The door opened very quickly, and Goddess Luo Shui walked out with sleepy eyes. She muttered, Sister Ruoqing, it's already so late. Why aren't you sleeping? Wan Ruoqing handed over the things in her hands. This is for you. She rubbed her eyes, took it with both hands, and asked doubtfully, what is it? The things you talked about during the day. She reached out to tidy up her messy hair and said, it's late. Go back to sleep. Sung Zumo pulled her arm. I want you to talk to me. Before Wan Ruoqing could nod, she was dragged in and sat on the edge of the bed. Sung Zumo hugged her arm and rested her head on her shoulder. She murmured, I don't want to leave you. You're about to get married, but you're still so childish. Sister Ruoqing, I'm sorry. She suddenly raised her head and looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes. I stole your favorite thing. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, it should have been yours in the first place. What's mine is yours. What's mine is yours. After a moment of silence, Sung Zumo suddenly smiled. She hugged her waist and said, hee, what I said today was all a lie. How could I steal something that my beloved Sister Ruoqing likes? Don't you like my poetry book very much? I'll give it to you, huh? Seeing her sudden change, Wan Ruoqing was dazed and looked at her with a confused expression. What are you talking about? She hugged Wan Ruoqing, and the two of them fell down together. Sleep. Wan Ruoqing struggled to get up. I'm going back to my room. She flipped over like a spoiled child and pressed Wan Ruoqing under her body. No, I want to sleep with you in my arms tonight, and in the future. You're about to get married. How can you? I don't care. I want in the future. I want forever. All right. If you say forever, then forever. Wan Ruoqing said helplessly. Then her body stiffened. She blushed and whispered, sleep. Don't touch. Goddess Luo Shui grabbed her hand and put it on a soft spot on her body. She murmured, now we're even. Li looked at Mississippi Lu, who was behind him helplessly, and said, don't follow me. I've said it 10 times. When things in the capital are settled, I'll go with you. Why are you in such a hurry? Mississippi Lu asked lightly. What else do you have to deal with? The Chui family. If the Chui family doesn't fall, how can we leave in peace? It's not like you don't know what happened a while ago. This kind of person is insane and has no bottom line. He can do anything. You don't want the people and things related to us in the capital to be targeted by the Chui family after we leave, right? Mississippi Lu didn't ask him again this time. She turned around and walked outside. Li was stunned for a moment and asked, where are you going? Mississippi Lu replied lightly, I'll help you. Li grabbed Mississippi Lu's arm and pulled her back. He regretted telling her about it earlier. Fong stood not far away and watched the joke. Compared to Li, who was having a headache, he was obviously in a much better mood. Recently, Fong could be said to be riding on the crest of success. When he spoke, his back was much straighter. Mrs. Fong and her sworn sister, Miss Xiao, had just come back from shopping. Fong was carrying a lot of bags of various sizes in his hands, but his face was full of bright smiles. Mississippi. Lu stopped and asked, do you feel that Uncle Fong is different from before? Lee was surprised and asked, "What's the difference?" Mississippi Lou thought for a moment and said, "In the past, when he was with Mrs. Fong, he always looked sad. Recently, he has been smiling more and more." Lee sighed and said, "People are in high spirits when they encounter happy events. Let it be happy. I just learned 2 words yesterday, and they seem to say that you can't be too happy." Mississippi Lou looked at him and said, "When things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction. Extreme joy begets." What is it again? Extreme joy begets sorrow. Mississippi Lou glanced at him and said, "You don't need to remind me. I can also think of it." A strong man came from the front and greeted the two of them. "Young master," second Mississippi Lee, he nodded and asked, "It's old Sue. Didn't you go to Ching and Mansion to pick up mother-in-law?" "Where is mother-in-law?" Old Sue sighed and said, "As soon as I came to the capital, I was dragged to the streets by my mother-in-law. I didn't bring any money with me, so I came back to get some." He waved his hand and said, "Go quickly. Remember to bring more." The strong man laughed and greeted the 2 people who were walking toward him. "Hello, sister-in-law. Hello, Miss Hong." After saying that, he realized that something was not quite right. His eyes stared straight at the young girl beside Mrs. Fong. Mrs. Fong looked at him and asked with a puzzled expression, "Do you know my sister?" "I don't know her." "Sister-in-law, you go ahead. I have something to do, so I'll go back first." Old Sue shook his head with a firm expression and strode forward. Mrs. Fong turned around, looked at him, and shouted, "Stop right there." Crash! The strong man stopped in his tracks. Fong's face turned pale, and the big and small bags in his hands fell to the ground. "What's wrong with him?" Mississippi Lou looked at Lee and asked in confusion. Lee pressed one hand on his forehead and sighed. He said, "He's too happy. Extreme joy begets sorrow." That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.